The brown-haired man with glasses declares his intent to teach his child alchemy to the best of his ability. A brown-haired man wearing an apron insists that the girl is destined to become a legendary chef instead.
The gray-haired woman argues that the child should serve nobility to secure a good partner.
The three adults stand in a tense circle while the atmosphere becomes heavy with their disagreement. A pink-haired girl peeks cautiously through a lush garden of blooming red roses.
The beautiful pink-haired girl with green eyes smiles radiantly as she steps into the light.
Television news reports a massive spike in deaths while a phone receives an urgent disaster alert. An ambulance races through the city streets while its loud siren wails into the night.
A massive truck collision occurs at a crosswalk amidst a frantic, repeating siren sound.
A woman in a brown shirt lies bleeding and unconscious on the gray asphalt.
Paramedics rush past the victim while her cracked phone displays a transmigration insurance advertisement.
Responders call for a stretcher while frantically checking if the injured woman can hear them. As her life fades, a soft final tap sounds, followed by a quiet beep as she accepts the offer. The short-haired woman in the brown shirt lets out a quick blink in utter confusion as her ID is called. She spins around in her seat, searching for the source of the voice in a shifting world. She finds herself in a crowded, glowing station filled with the energy of a busy terminal. A bright ding sounds as a monitor displays the transmigration assessment results for a different reader.
A clerk at a desk congratulates a girl with a red backpack on her easy novel assignment.
The girl leaves in a state of pure bliss while the woman in brown watches, stunned. The woman in the brown shirt remains confused about the nature of a transmigration assessment.
A winged corgi suddenly appears with a quick, energetic spring to tell her it is her turn. The woman stares in shock as she realizes a small dog with wings is talking to her.
The cheerful winged corgi floats amidst sunflowers while holding a small silver laptop. The creature introduces itself as an official assessor from the Transmigration Bureau.
The corgi bluntly informs the woman that she has died and arrived in the afterlife.
She stands completely frozen, struggling to comprehend the news of her own passing. A heavy gulp sounds as the woman realizes the sudden finality of her previous life.
The corgi explains that the gods governing the afterlife are highly interested in story-based content.
A brilliant flash of light represents the divine power to create and dimensionalize new worlds.
The assessor describes how souls are transmigrated to these fictional worlds created by the gods. The small creature asks the woman if she has a specific genre preference for her new life. The woman hangs her head in silent thought as she considers her response. She looks up with intense determination, requesting to be transmigrated into a childcare fantasy romance.
A hot blaze of determination surrounds her as she vows to enjoy a smooth sailing afterlife.
A thought bubble lists the many genres she has mastered during her time as a reader.
She daydreams of a blissful life as a pampered young lady adored by doting servants. The woman passionately recounts the misery of her past life and the tragic loss of her family.
She promises to play her part well if granted a chance to finally experience familial love.
The winged corgi cheerfully agrees to take her request into account for the assessment. A clear ding sounds as the woman is told to look at the screen for her results.
The display reveals she has been assigned an extremely difficult S-class action fantasy novel.
The corgi and a crowd of onlookers are amazed by the rarity of such a grueling assignment. The woman stands paralyzed with horror at the unexpected and difficult result. A sense of gloom washes over her as she recognizes the title of the frustrating story.
She recalls the novel's ruined world and its protagonist's cycle of endless suffering and death. Memories of the story's negative reviews flood her mind as she despairs over her luck.
The corgi reveals that she will be transmigrated as a cute little girl with pink hair.
The assessor adds that her role is specifically the daughter of an exploited servant in a manor.
The woman mutters that being a random tree would be preferable to this difficult fate. The corgi pushes her toward the gate while she frantically tries to delay the process. The winged corgi assessor reassures the woman about her support system before letting out a sudden, shocked gasp at his laptop screen. A dramatic dun-dun sound echoes as the assessor realizes the brown-haired woman is the first purchaser of a premium insurance package. The winged creature excitedly explains that her rare S-class novel assignment makes perfect sense now that her premium status is revealed. A wave of murmurs and a loud clamor fill the station as onlookers express their intense jealousy over the woman's incredible luck. She questions her mysterious purchase just as the corgi assessor starts the transmigration with a wand and a bright flash. The assessor offers a final blessing for the protection of the gods as the woman is sent away in a swirling vortex. She lets out a startled shout of surprise as her body is caught in the blinding light of the translocation process. Panicked, the brown-haired woman tries to call for a wait as she struggles to process the speed of her departure. A loud, echoing scream sounds as she is pulled through a cosmic tunnel toward her new life in another world.
A clear ding sounds as a system notification confirms her premium package benefits over a view of a grand white estate. A pink-haired girl lies unconscious inside a sunlit room, viewed through a window surrounded by lush red rose bushes. A pink status window informs the transmigrator that her actions will be restricted while the mandatory tutorial period is active.
The clock on the wall lets out a quiet turn as the system explains how the timeline will eventually reset to match the novel.
The girl with the bright green eyes lets out a quick blink as she wonders why her surroundings are so noisy.
With a sudden, energetic spring, the pink-haired girl sits up in her bed, looking completely bewildered by her new environment.
She stares down at her tiny, pale hands while coming to the heavy realization that her previous life has officially ended.
She rubs her cheek while grumbling about the wicked winged puppy that sent her to such a difficult story world.
A loud stomp and dash sound as the girl frantically jumps out of her bed to investigate her surroundings. She looks into an ornate mirror and shouts in shock as she confirms her transformation into a cute, pink-haired child. The girl gazes at a shelf of books while curiously fondling her soft, chubby cheeks to ensure she isn't dreaming. She immediately accepts her new reality and spends the next 10 minutes admiring her own doll-like beauty in the mirror. Her mood sours as she pouts about being a little girl in a world that clearly isn't a childcare fantasy. A heavy flop sounds as she collapses in despair over her role as the daughter of a servant working for a villainous noble. A sudden flicker appears in her green eyes as she notices a new system notification floating in the air. A glowing blue system interface reveals a detailed architectural map of Gillette Castle within the Winchester Kingdom.
She is awestruck by the provided manner of the manor, noting that her new life feels exactly like a video game.
A sudden, sharp realization causes the girl to let out a startled gasp as she recognizes a specific name on the screen.
The system displays a warning about the Count's spoiled son, the primary antagonist of this specific chapter in the novel. A satisfying palm sounds as she punches her palm, finally remembering the arrogant and incompetent character from the story.
She recalls the young lord, a shadowy and prideful figure who sits arrogantly upon a grand, star-decorated throne.
Memories of the novel describe how the man bought his knighthood despite having zero talent for swordsmanship.
She recalls the story's kind-hearted protagonist, a white-haired man who eventually saved the incompetent noble from certain death.
The girl peeks through the window, remembering how the protagonist never asked for a reward despite his heroic actions.
She gazes at the massive manor from her window, noting how the noble insisted on dragging the protagonist back to the estate.
Looking out at the manor, the pink-haired girl contemplates the frustrating meeting between the gullible hero and the villainous son.
She recalls the young lord's betrayal as he turned his back on the hero immediately after using him like a mercenary. Visions of fire and destruction cloud her mind as she remembers the dungeon burst that devastated the entire county.
The girl stares out her window, frustrated by the mild payback the villain received in such a long and grueling chapter.
A cheerful chirp-chirp sounds from the birds outside, momentarily breaking the girl's focus on the tragic events of the novel. A formal text box warns that such disasters can occur anywhere, highlighting the real danger of this fantasy world.
She looks over the grand fountain in the courtyard, pondering the fact that dungeon bursts are spreading across the continent.
Another heavy flop sounds as she collapses again, feeling hopeless about her chances in such a dangerous and frustrating story. She laments her poor memory, struggling to recall details of the dark romance novel she read years ago in middle school.
The pink-haired girl cries out in despair, begging the system administrators to realize that not all transmigrators have perfect memories.
A loud crackle and vzz sound as the system map begins to glitch and distort with digital interference. A soft shimmer of pink and blue energy begins to wash over the distorted architectural view of the manor. The girl looks up with a startled expression as the shimmering light begins to coalesce into a new interface. A sudden shwoom sounds as a massive shelf of glowing books appears, identified by the system as the ultimate library. With an energetic spring, she wonders if the administrators actually heard her plea and provided her with a solution. A final ding sounds as the system explains the library contains every book she has ever legally read in her lifetime.
The pink-haired girl is thrilled to realize her personal library likely contains the crucial fantasy novel she needs.
She sifts through her collection, finding textbooks tedious but enjoying the various romance novels.
A look of delight crosses her face as she discovers a specific dating guide for returnees.
The system screen displays a full collection of the dark fantasy series she was dreading.
Holding one of the volumes, she feels much more confident about her survival now.
She steels herself for what comes next. The pink-haired girl cheekily asks the system if there are any other bonuses for her.
A question mark appears over her head as she considers the possibility of receiving cash. A massive whoosh sounds as a torrential rain of gold coins fills her room.
A dramatic da-dun sounds as she sits buried in the sudden, sparkling pile of gold. She is stunned to realize the 120 million in cash is actually her own death benefit. A sudden thought causes her eyes to widen with greed.
A soft shimmer sounds as a display of high-tier items appears before the awestruck girl.
She wonders if her new fortune can be used to buy these powerful upgrades.
She admits it feels strange to spend the money paid out for her own passing.
A heavy plop sounds as she sinks comfortably into the massive piles of gold.
With an energetic grin, the girl prepares to start her ultimate shopping spree.
She's relieved to see a note about purchasing more currency using funds from her current world.
She reminds herself to be prudent with her spending.
A loud dun sounds as she identifies an essential combat skill package.
Surrounded by warrior silhouettes, she decides she must purchase a combat set to survive.
A quick scroll sounds as she swipes through the digital catalog for more options. Another dun sounds as she spots a blessing that doubles skill experience gain. A sharp ding sounds as the system denies her purchase, much to her confusion. A brilliant golden star represents a legendary growth blessing that is currently not for sale.
A formal notification describes the massive 5-fold boost to skill experience provided by the blessing.
The pink-haired girl gasps, realizing she received a priceless limited item through her insurance.
A steady badum sounds as she lists her survival tools and hopes for the best. She sits in silence, reflecting on the grim reality of the world she now inhabits.
She acknowledges the critical importance of the protagonist's recurring life cycles.
A thorny hourglass represents the agonizing repeat of time for the story's hero.
The narrative recounts how the protagonist is constantly betrayed and hunted like prey by those around him.
A gentle shimmer sounds as she prays to arrive during one of the hero's later lives.
She hopes a stronger protagonist will improve the chances for a peaceful world.
The girl looks tiny and vulnerable in the vast, empty room.
A system window informs her that the story is beginning at the 17th loop.
A sharp slash sounds as she remembers that the 17th loop ends instantly with the hero's death.
A heavy sprawl sounds as she collapses to the floor, cursing her terrible luck.
She worries that the world's most powerful murderer will go unchecked if the protagonist falls.
A firm clench sounds as she realizes the hero is still too weak to survive this cycle. She commands herself to snap out of it and find a way to make it work. A determined rise sounds as she begins to pick herself up from the floor.
The pink-haired girl stands tall, vowing to rely only on her own strength from now on. She places her total trust in her library, blessing, and skill package.
A clear ding sounds as a mandatory tutorial quest appears for the S-Class Transmigrator.
She stares intently at the air, waiting for her instructions.
A heavy dun sounds as the quest reveals a deadly penalty for failure.
A series of quick tapping sounds as she frantically tries to contact the administrators about the death penalty.
A loud burst sounds as a brown-haired girl kicks open the door and shouts for Eilette.
Startled, Eilette wonders who the newcomer is, while the girl claims she knew she'd find her there.
The brown-haired girl shouts to announce that she has found Eilette hidden.
Why is she shouting? Eilette wonders as she covers her ears from the sudden noise.
A loud slam sounds as the head maid barges in, calling Eilette a parasite and ordering her to the kitchen.
Eilette is bewildered by the sudden demand to begin kitchen work.
A sudden rough yank sounds as the head maid drags the protesting Eilette out of the room.
A loud burst sounds as Mr. Rodaline and the pink-haired boy intervene, arguing that Eilette is too young for such labor. Eilette is surprised to see the young boy shares her distinct hair color. Mr. Rodaline pleads with the head maid to reconsider her harsh demands. The young boy expresses his concern that Eilette will be injured by the hectic work in the kitchen.
Eilette realizes that these people must be her new family.
She softly reflects on the unfamiliar concept of having a family.
The head maid yells at Prince and Mr. Rodaline to return to their duties and stop spoiling the girl.
A sudden flinch sounds as Prince points out that Nellie is older but isn't required to work.
The head maid screams that her daughter Nellie is being trained for refined service and cannot ruin her hands with labor.
The head maid threatens to report their insubordination to the Countess while Eilette watches silently. A quick tap-tap sounds as a hand reaches out to get Eilette's attention.
A quiet snicker and whisper sound as Nellie mockingly asks if Eilette is too scared to cry.
Eilette is unfazed by the threat, realizing she has clearly identified her enemies in this household.
A loud dun sounds as the head maid threatens to send Eilette to the grueling laundry room instead.
Mr. Rodaline is horrified, explaining that the extreme heat and labor in the laundry room exhaust even the strongest servants.
A firm step sounds as Eilette interjects, telling everyone there is no need for further conflict.
Eilette cheerfully agrees to help in the kitchen, determined to clear up the current mess.
She resolves not to let her family suffer, even though she doesn't truly know them yet.
With a bright and confident smile, Eilette declares that she will perform her tasks perfectly.
A notification explains that the item shop offers a variety of useful non-combat skills.
A system window displays a non-combat skill package available for purchase for 2 million cash.
Ailette is empowered as she successfully unlocks several high-level culinary and kitchen maintenance skills.
A determined look fills her eyes as she prepares for her first task.
She decides to give the new challenge her best effort.
A loud splash sounds as fresh broccoli is washed in a bowl of clear water.
A series of quick chop and slice sounds as Ailette prepares vegetables with professional precision.
The other kitchen staff stare in stunned silence at the young girl's incredible efficiency.
A triumphant ta-da sounds as Ailette proudly presents a bowl of perfectly prepped carrots and broccoli.
A soft sparkle sounds as she shows off the peeled garlic and mushrooms she finished.
A sharp glint appears in her eyes as she ensures the beef is diced to the perfect size. A notification confirms that even the whipped cream has been prepared to perfection.
The staff is completely speechless at the child's mastery of culinary preparation.
A sudden ouch sounds as Ailette fakes a sore arm to secure a short break. A soft plop sounds as she happily sits down on a small stool to rest.
A digital timer begins counting down the first second of her break.
The timer reaches 2 seconds while she continues to smile and rest.
A sudden spring sounds as Ailette jumps back up, declaring her break is over and she's ready to clean.
A quiet whisper sounds as the staff wonders how she can be so skilled and tireless.
A gleeful hee-hee sounds as Ailette realizes the hard labor is providing her with a steady stream of experience points.
The staff continues to watch the girl with growing curiosity and awe.
A sudden, proud realization causes the staff to declare how adorable the young girl is.
The kitchen workers shower Ailette with compliments, amazed by her talent and knowledge of ingredients.
A cheery background contrasts with the headmaid's growing frustration as her plan to punish Ailette fails.
A quick tsk sounds as the headmaid realizes she can't scold the girl for doing a perfect job.
An older cook calls out to Ailette while the headmaid watches with a suspicious and disgruntled expression.
A heavy dun sounds as a kitchen worker asks the pink-haired girl to taste the cream stew. The kitchen staff is shocked because the head chef takes so much pride in her work.
A horrified look crosses the headmaid's face as the staff explains the head chef never lets anyone else taste her cooking.
The headmaid yells at Pisha, saying it's ridiculous to let a child taste the food, while the cook calls out to her. The blonde head chef looks at the headmaid and tells her to get out of her workspace and go do her own work.
A pained arg sounds as the headmaid flinches under the head chef's stern gaze.
The head chef holds out a ladle and kindly invites Ailette to have a taste.
Ailette takes the ladle with a curious expression on her face.
A bright flash sounds as Ailette prepares to activate the power of her cash.
A soft slurp sounds as Ailette tastes the stew with the refined palate of a sommelier.
Ailette suggests that the stew needs a bit more flavor and recommends adding crushed pepper.
The head chef listens thoughtfully with her arms crossed over her apron.
A gentle smile spreads as a small grin appears on the head chef's face.
The head chef looks at Ailette and asks if she would like to learn how to cook.
A surprised murmur sounds as the staff discusses how the strict head chef just offered to take a disciple. Ailette realizes she cannot let this golden opportunity slip through her fingers.
With an innocent look, Ailette says that she guessed she could learn to cook.
Ailette is thrilled, realizing that this new task will provide her with tons of experience points.
She looks over at the headmaid and realizes one more important detail.
The headmaid is enraged, realizing that her attempt to punish the girl only paved the way for her success.
A heavy stomp and a humph sound as the headmaid storms out of the kitchen in a huff. The head chef tells Ailette to arrive by 7 o'clock tomorrow, while a staff member notes the exception being made. A bright beam sounds as the joyful pink-haired girl salutes and says, "Yes, ma'am."
Warm sunlight streams through the window.
The kitchen staff tells Ailette to take it easy and offers to finish her work so she doesn't wear her arms out. Ailette smiles and insists that she is fine and can do the work herself.
A quiet hee-hee-hee sounds as Ailette watches her experience bar reach 98%.
The staff remarks on how hardworking Ailette is and tells her to ask if she needs any help.
A rhythmic clack and clang sound as Ailette continues her work in the kitchen. Ailette wipes sweat from her brow, reflecting on how this labor feels just like her past life's part-time jobs.
She whisks a bowl and admits she wouldn't have pushed herself so hard if she knew this was the result.
A soft sob sounds as Ailette wishes she had transmigrated into a proper childcare fantasy romance instead.
She imagines a life where she could have been an imperial family member or a powerful noble's child.
A sudden clack sounds as Prince calls out to Ali while she admits she brought this situation on herself. A young boy in a vest approaches and asks if she is all right and if everything is fine. A quick whip and whisk sound as Ailette remembers Prince's name while he apologizes for being late after his history lesson. Prince takes the whisk from her and tells her to take a break while he handles the rest. Prince smiles warmly at Ailette and acknowledges that the work must have been very hard on her.
Islet says she is fine, but the boy insists she give him the tasks she needs help with.
Prince starts to tell her the first thing to do in a kitchen is wash her hands, but she stops him. Islet is stunned as she looks down and sees red, painful-looking marks on the boy's hand.
She's horrified to realize that the marks are actually whip marks. During her break, Islet reads her novel and finds the section where the Rodeline family is mentioned. The book describes Leonard Rodeline as an elite alchemist who worked at the famous Golden Ivory Tower. The narrative explains that the alchemist was cast out after getting on the wrong side of powerful people.
Count Gillette hired him but slashed his wages because he was a single father with 2 children.
Because of an unfair contract, the alchemist's children, Prince and Islet, became the Count's servants.
Islet asks about his hand, and Prince explains he was whipped because Lord Ramdio got questions wrong on a test.
Prince smiles and says he wasn't beaten much today because he finished the Lord's homework for him.
Islet is heartbroken that a 12-year-old is treated this way and tells him to get ointment from their father.
Prince asks if their father is unaware that he would rather endure being whipped than lose his chance to attend classes.
Prince reminds Islet that she previously accepted a bribe of pudding to keep his secret from their father.
Islet realizes she is bound by the bribe and cannot report her brother's situation to their father.
Islet looks deeply conflicted about her choice. Islet tells Prince they will get ointment from the laboratory later, and she offers to help apply it to his hand.
Prince becomes teary-eyed and moved, prompting a sudden, worried question from the pink-haired girl about what is wrong.
Prince reveals that Islet hasn't called him by his actual name since she was 4 years old.
Prince recalls how Islet used to avoid him because she thought he was dull, leading her to realize the original character was quite unkind.
Prince observes that the grueling work in the kitchen seems to have changed his sister's personality for the better.
Islet laughs and says the hard work helped her grow, vowing to treat her kind brother better from now on.
Islet reassures Prince that she won't be mean to him anymore.
Prince is simply happy to see his sister acting more like her old self, regardless of her past behavior.
Islet reflects that she truly is a fake sister now, and mentions her last memory of her own brother was when he was 12.
A brown-haired staff member interrupts to announce that it is time for the servants to have their snacks.
As the siblings prepare to wash dishes, Nellie enters the room with a steady, firm step sounding.
Nellie lets out a mocking snicker and asks Islet if she was tasked with doing the lowly dishes.
Nellie mockingly pities the girl while bragging about only preparing tea for the Countess as a series of clack and clatter sounds echo.
Islet is annoyed by the girl's constant bullying and persistent meanness.
A determined look fills her eyes. A notification announces that the skill for steeping fragrant tea has been successfully unlocked.
Ali is thrilled that her new skill leveled up so rapidly, but pauses to wonder about a new realization. She ponders her next clever move.
Nellie steps closer and insults the siblings, calling them suited for useless tasks and telling them not to space out.
A sudden spring sounds as Islet jumps up, followed by a loud whack as she accidentally hits Nellie's head.
Both girls hold their heads in pain while Nellie yells about Allie's stone head, and Allie retorts it's her own line.
Nellie yells at the dim-witted blockheads until the head maid calls her name from the doorway. Isella tells Nellie that she must behave properly at all times and cannot serve the Countess with such a poor attitude.
Isella asks Nellie if she finished weighing the tea leaves as requested while the brown-haired girl looks flustered.
Islet observes the scene, realizing that Isella is responsible for the Countess's refreshments and sees a perfect opening.
A mischievous, clever grin appears on Islet's face. A sudden series of top-top sounds as Islet catches Madame Pacia's attention.
Islet runs toward the cook with more quick top-top sounds and asks if it would be all right to help.
Ali asks if she can be the one to steep the tea for the staff's break while Isella watches with a stern expression.
Ali enthusiastically says she wants to serve tea to everyone who has worked hard alongside her today.
Pacia gives her permission while Nellie watches with a skeptical look, wondering if Ali thinks tea steeping is easy.
A flurry of pour, fwish, clack, bubble, and simmer sounds as Islet prepares the tea with professional expertise.
The kitchen staff is surprised to see Islet making tea for them while the head maid watches with a cold stare.
Islet presents a stunningly elegant tray filled with perfectly steeped tea and a variety of decorative pastries. A loud bustle sounds as the staff gathers around, amazed and thankful for the beautiful spread Islet prepared for them.
A soft sip sounds as a kitchen worker tastes the tea and is immediately taken aback by something. The staff is amazed by the wonderful taste, questioning if this is truly the same tea they usually drink.
Isella tells Pacia she would like to try the tea too, and Pacia tells her to ask Islet for a cup.
Islet cheerfully raises a cup toward the head maid, reassuring her that there is plenty of tea for everyone.
A sharp clink sounds as the head maid takes the saucer and cup into her hands.
A quiet, refined sip sounds as Isella tastes the tea brewed by the young girl.
Isella stands in silence, her eyes wide as she processes the flavor.
A loud shout sounds as Isella calls out to the girl, causing Islet to flinch in surprise.
A heavy da-dun sounds as Isella demands to know what kind of foolishness this is.
Isella continues her loud shout, repeating her demand while the pink-haired girl looks on in confusion and shock.
Madame Paisha steps in with a heavy step, telling Isella not to be so harsh and pointing out that she clearly enjoyed the tea.
Isella aggressively insists Ailette is meant for tea as a heavy thump sounding takes her attention. Nellie is baffled by the compliments given to her rival.
Paisha mentions Nellie, but Isella delivers a verbal stab sounding as she declares Nellie talentless.
Isella demands Ailette find her tomorrow to begin her tea service training.
The head chef counters that the gifted girl will learn kitchen work instead.
A sudden, firm grab and clasp sounding follow as both women take her arms. A heavy da-dun sounding accompanies their demand that Ailette learn from both of them.
Nellie is left speechless as Ailette makes a quick turn sounding to address the women.
The pink-haired girl cheerfully agrees to try her very best.
Nellie is visibly shocked and furious by the turn of events. The brown-haired girl lets out a frustrated low groan. Ali checks in with Prince, asking if he located the healing ribet. Prince admits he found no supplies within their father's belongings. Ailette is stunned that an alchemist's home is lacking medicine. She realizes the head maid is stealing supplies for her spin.
Prince explains that the entire household staff is in on the scheme.
Ailette feels an overwhelming sense of injustice brewing.
She observes the neglected room and realizes her family is being exploited.
A narrative note explains how the religious order monopolizes divine healing power.
The scene shifts to the Grand Palace where alchemy serves as a substitute. Leonard Rodeline is revealed to be a legendary alchemist from the Ivory Tower.
Ali decides to handle the application later after a quick clock sounder.
Prince remains dejected and gloomy, facing away from his sister.
Ailette gently asks if he is still in pain. The boy sorrowfully admits he is sad about missing his chance. Ali is determined to find a way to help her brother.
A sudden rise sounding as she discovers all the necessary alchemy tools.
A system notification confirms she has acquired the alchemist skill. A bright ding sounding marks her resolution to craft a healing ointment. She realizes her current level is too low for medicine. Ali decides to craft soap and beauty cream instead. She makes a quick rush sounding across the room toward her brother. Prince is confused since they supposedly have no ointment. Darkness falls over the estate as night arrives. Leonard returns home and walks down the quiet, dimly lit hallway.
A soft creak sounding follows as he opens the bedroom door.
He is shocked to find his laboratory space in a complete mess. A soft rustle sounding as he finds his children sleeping peacefully. Leonard notices a collection of small glass jars left on the desk. Shimmering light blue potions sparkle brightly in the moonlight.
He questions Ali's involvement after a sudden sharp raise sounding.
A note from Ailette explains the potions are intended as strategic gifts. Leonard realizes his daughter is thinking ahead to secure the Countess's favor. He remains skeptical that the young girl crafted these entirely alone. A sudden pop sounding follows as he opens a bottle to verify the quality. He tests the liquid with a gentle rub sounding across his skin. Leonard is instantly stunned by the incredible effectiveness of the craft. He admits the beauty potion is of professional quality. A sudden turn sounding as he feels an immense wave of pride. Leonard decides to personally begin Ailette's alchemy training the very next day. Sorrow hangs heavy during the funeral. Relatives argue about whether to send the girl to an orphanage or leave her to die. Heartbreak fills her red-rimmed eyes.
A sudden, heavy step sounding interrupts.
Her uncle tells her to get up, stating she will be staying with him and her aunt from now on. A solitary white flower sikvalam. Quiet sob and sniffle sounds echo. A pillow hits her with a whack sounding. Her cousin yells for her to keep it down because the noise is keeping her awake. The cousin calls her a leech and an annoyance before a door shuts with a slam sounding. The once vibrant flower begins to wither. Her uncle claims they are struggling financially and tells her not to expect any support from them. The girl dejectedly accepts the situation. Years pass as she grows older.
The family returns home with Shopper's giggle sass.
She asks if they will eat, sir. Her uncle turns with a cold dismissal. They return from another shopping trip. She asks about dinner, but her uncle repeats that they have already eaten. A door shuts with a slam sobbing. A lonely clack sounding during dinner. She wonders why they dine out if they are struggling to make ends meet.
A savings passbook lands with a smack sobbing.
Ali confronts them, accusing them of stealing her father's death benefits, the accident settlement, and the house proceeds. Her uncle calls her a little ingrate. Her aunt tells her shame on her. They demand she get out of their house immediately. Isolation sets in on the bench.
Ali cries out for her father. She recalls her happy, lost family.
Loneliness remains her only companion. She calls for her mother despairingly. Ali begs them not to leave. Grief echoes among the falling leaves.
A warmth takes hold of her hand.
Ali wakes with groan and moan sounds as Leonard comforts her, explaining she was only having a nightmare. Her green eyes flutter with a blink summing.
Ali asks her father if it is really him, and he smilingly confirms that it is.
Leonard promises to stay there until she falls back asleep.
The night passes with a promise. Ali wakes up with a flustered, wide-eyed look. She is baffled to find both her father and brother holding tightly to her hands while they sleep.
A sudden smack sounding accompanies her shame as she realizes her nightmare wasn't a dream and she made a fool of herself.
The boys sleep peacefully beside her. A soft creak sounding follows her departure.
Wide awake from shame, Ali decides she might as well spend the time reading the novel.
Magical light surrounds the floating mark.
Ali searches for mentions of the Rhodoline family.
Discovery dawns as she finds the entry. The text introduces Prince Rhodoline as a servant of the place.
A narrative box pleads for forgiveness regarding Lord Ramdeo's earlier rudeness.
The narration continues, offering to guide the guest to his room in Ramdeo's stead.
The pink-haired boy leads a silver-haired guest into a guest room, mentioning its high quality.
The silver-haired man is visibly uncertain, questioning if staying in a lady's room is truly appropriate.
Prince reassures his guest, telling him there is no need to worry. Prince admits the room held his late sister's things, while Ali reads the tragic passage in the novel.
A sudden drop sounding as the pink-haired girl lets the book fall in shock.
Ali is completely horrified as she realizes she is the character destined to die.
A flurry of flounder and fumble sounds as Ali panics over the cruelty of the story. A system alert displays the grim confirmation of Islet Rodoline's death. The text explains the girl simply slipped and fell, leading to her demise.
The narration describes the servant's grief as he refuses to pack away his sister's belongings.
A sudden, sharp raise sounding as Ali stares at the book, accepting this as her future.
She critiques the castle's terrible placement directly on top of a dangerous dungeon. A firm, heavy clench sounding as Ali prepares herself for the struggle ahead. A quick flip sounding as the girl refuses to sit idly and wait for her end.
Ali believes her knowledge of the novel's contents is the key to finding a solution. The scene shifts to the quiet night sky hanging over the stone castle.
A sudden, loud shut sounding as Ali closes the magical book.
Ali expresses her frustration with the nonsensical plot with a sudden squeeze sounding.
She shouts a complaint at the author regarding the extreme abuse of the characters.
A shimmer sounding accompanies the appearance of a combat skill package window.
The pink-haired girl is determined to use the package to select a combat ability.
A narrative box notes that healers are an exceptionally rare existence in this universe.
Ali makes her final decision, shouting her desire to become a healer.
A sudden, powerful whoosh sounding as a bright energy surges around the girl.
A bright ding sounding marks the arrival of a new system notification.
Ali is caught off guard as she realizes she has been assigned a quest.
The scene transitions to the exterior of a grand building featuring a large clock tower. A rhythmic swish and sweep sounding as a broom clears debris from the floor. A rhythmic swoosh and sweep sounding as Ali diligently cleans the abandoned chapel.
A soft plop sounding as the girl takes a seat on a wooden pew to rest. Quiet cough sounds echo through the dusty air as she realizes she needs to clean more often.
A sudden, sharp glance sounding as Ali looks toward the floating quest window.
A shimmer sounding accompanies the display of the prayer quest conditions.
The quest requires 1,000 consecutive days of morning prayer between 5 and 7 a.m.
Ali realizes she cannot use her growth blessing to bypass this long requirement.
She decides to commit to the task within the castle's abandoned chapel. A sudden, firm clasp sounding as Ali joins her hands in a prayerful gesture.
A heavy squeeze sounding as she focuses her mind with her eyes shut tight.
The pink-haired girl sits in silent, deep concentration.
She is suddenly stumped, wondering exactly how one is supposed to begin a prayer.
A narrative box explains her dilemma, as she was never religious in her previous life.
A dejected, low droop sounding as Ali struggles to pray with her whole heart.
A sudden, sharp raise sounding as she remembers a crucial detail from her past.
She recalls the quirky angel and the god she heard about in the Afterlife Bureau.
A sudden, energetic spring sounding as she prepares herself to speak.
A heavy da-dun sounding accompanies her loud prayer to the gods of the Transmigration Bureau.
Ali shouts at the top of her lungs, begging the deities for divine power. The pink-haired girl continues her desperate, loud plea for power within the empty chapel.
A sudden beam sounding as Ali celebrates her successful prayer. Ali continues her prayer, addressing the gods of the Transmigration Bureau. She complains about her transmigration and asks to use a shorter nickname for the gods. The pink-haired girl asks why they brought her here, claiming she was a Nebwe.
A dark flashback reveals the cold, shadowy figures of her past life relatives.
A heavy squeeze sounding as Ali admits her previous life wasn't very happy. She rants about her greedy relatives stealing her family's inheritance and insurance money. A system notification shows prayer progress at 60% while she reflects on her regrets.
Ali looks down thoughtfully as she considers her situation in this new world. She expresses genuine gratitude for having a caring family in her current life.
She notes how Leonard and Prince remind her of her lost family members.
Ali feels deeply embarrassed by her own emotional outburst.
A quick peek sounding as she checks the progress bar, which has reached 90%.
a loud bam sounding as she realizes her uncle will steal her old rent deposit.
Ali fumes over her uncle's greed while the progress reaches 95%. A sudden beep sounding marks the full completion of the prayer quest. She continues to lament how her past efforts always seem to benefit her greedy relatives.
She thinks about her uncle's predictable behavior while a system notification arrives. A sudden ding sounding as Ali regrets not spending her savings before her death.
A quick peek sounding as she notices a new system message appearing. A loud da sounding follows as the system explains her rent deposit paid for her insurance.
A sudden shimmer and sparkle sounding as she reacts with shock to the revelation.
Multiple dings sounding as several different deities respond to her heartfelt plea.
She finds the titles of the responding gods strangely familiar. Ali turns around, noticing the text within the floating system window.
She realizes the gods are actually providing a direct response to her prayer.
A sudden flash sounding as a divine voice reveals her cousin's recent failures.
Ali is amused to learn of her cousin's repeated academic struggles in her old world.
A rhythmic nod sounding as she hears about her uncle's financial downfall and illness.
She feels relieved and notes that the interested god seems quite friendly.
A sudden ding sounding as the system notes a god's cautious behavior toward her. Ali wonders why a divine entity would feel cautious in her presence.
She recalls a news broadcast about the crisis that led to her transmigration.
The system explains her death was a mistake caused by a technical bug.
She is left completely speechless by the reveal of the divine system error. A soft plop sounding as the pink-haired girl dejectedly accepts her fate. Ali asks for immense strength to defeat the final boss as compensation for the error. She gives an enthusiastic thumbs up while praising the creator of the universe. She is surprised by the sudden, overwhelming enthusiasm from the divine entity.
The system announces that she has become the god's very first follower.
A sudden flash sounding as a massive pillar of light descends upon her. Ali looks stunned by the overwhelming and radiant display of divine power.
She is bewildered by how quickly the situation is escalating around her.
A sudden ding sounding marks the arrival of several new system notifications.
She realizes she has gained incredible advanced divine skills and the god's favor.
The pink-haired girl sits alone within the quiet, sun-drenched chapel.
A sudden raise sounding as she wonders about the significance of what just happened. Ali vows to be a faithful believer in the divine voice that helped her.
Sunlight streams through the grand, ornate windows of the stone castle.
A quick clack sounding as a hand sets down a small glass bottle of potion.
Countess Sandra Gillette admires her complexion, thinking her skin feels great today. The Countess credits a new potion from the alchemist for her radiant appearance.
She recalls doubting the alchemist because his previous potions failed to improve her son's swordsmanship.
Sandra grumbles about the alchemist being an ingrate for withholding such effective beauty products until now.
Bianca Gillette scolds her mother for being too distracted by vanity to listen to her.
Sandra laughs off the criticism and asks her daughter where they left off in their conversation.
Bianca reiterates that they were discussing the future fate of House Gillette.
Bianca argues she should lead the family and marry a knight to prevent her foolish brother's downfall. Sandra feels intimidated by her daughter's shrewdness, wondering if a 10-year-old should have such worries.
An older servant named Acela enters to serve tea to the Countess and Lady Bianca.
Sandra questions Bianca about her habit of sending away every playmate that is brought to her.
Bianca dismisses her previous playmates for failing to meet her high standards as a cup is set down. A sudden, curious look from the young noble girl as she notices something on the table.
Bianca finds the served dish to be an incredibly peculiar choice for a dessert.
Isela explains that the dish is apple soup made by the alchemist's young daughter.
Acela praises Ali's dessert-making talent, while a chibi Ali celebrates her success in the kitchen.
Sandra is instantly won over by the exquisite and perfect flavor of the soup.
The Countess orders that Ali be rewarded with plenty of snacks for pleasing her so well. Bianca is surprised to hear her mother mention the existence of beauty potions.
Sandra admits she never realized potions could be used for cosmetics as well as healing.
Bianca wonders why a rigid alchemist like Leonard Rodeline would suddenly begin making beauty potions.
Isela mentions that Ali also made high-quality soap for the servants, which their father was proud of.
Bianca calls out for the headmaid's attention with a serious expression.
The dark-haired girl demands to know exactly where the alchemist's daughter is located right now.
The scene shifts to the bright garden where rows of cabbages grow near a wooden cart.
Ali smiles while picking tomatoes, thinking about how pretty and ripe they look.
She laments having to perform manual labor even in her new life in the afterlife.
A basket of tomatoes gleams with a sudden magical shine under the afternoon sun. A sudden, aggressive snatch sounding as the basket of tomatoes is stolen from the girl.
Lord Ramdio confronts Ali with a smirk, asking her what she is looking at.
Ali recognizes him as the Count's spoiled son by his expensive clothes and mean face.
Ramdio ignores Ali's request for her basket, admiring the firm, round tomatoes for his game.
A sudden, sharp whoosh sounding as the boy raises a tomato high above his head.
a loud whack and splat sounding as the boy pelted the hard-working servants with the fruit. Ramdio laughs at the staff's misery while Ali fumes behind him, calling him a despicable brat.
The boy demands that Prince's sister fetch him more tomatoes immediately after running out.
Ali is forced to serve the spoiled young lord, acting as his powerless garden assistant. Ramdeo continues his disruptive game, shouting about how much fun he is having hitting people.
A sudden, wet squish sounding interrupts the boy's laughter and catches him off guard.
Ramdio looks down in total disgust at the slimy, gooey mess in his palm.
The tomato in his hand is rotten and crawling with several tiny, smiling white worms.
A terrified toss sounding as the boy screams in horror and flings the rotten fruit away. Ali offers a fake apology for picking the rotten tomato in a hurry, thinking he deserves it.
She pretends to console the boy while he is completely paralyzed by revulsion.
Ali smiles cheerfully, asking if he wants to get back to his game of throwing tomatoes.
Romeo refuses and snatches his hand away, wanting nothing more to do with the guardman.
A sudden, frantic dash sounding as the boy flees while threatening Ali to keep quiet.
Ali turns back toward the castle, ready to finish her kitchen chores after her small revenge. A sudden, loud shout of her name makes the pink-haired girl stop in her tracks. Bianca stands before Ali, huffing and puffing with an angry and determined look on her face.
Nellie Brownhair accusing Ali of being touchy-feely with Lord Ramdio.
Ali asks if Nellie ran here just to fight, but she is told to shut up as a quick step sounding marks the other girl's approach.
Nellie demands to know what they talked about and why the Lord ignored her as if she weren't even there.
Ali realizes Nellie has a crush on the spoiled brat and refuses to answer her rude, demanding questions. Her frustration boils over with a sharp, harsh grind sounding as she prepares to lash out at the girl.
A sudden, aggressive yank sounding follows as Nellie grabs Ali's collar and demands she learn to know her place.
A system notification notes it can only glare at Nellie as she continues to accuse Ali of having an ulterior motive for serving tea. Nellie warns the pink-haired girl to stay away from Lord Ramdeo and spitefully calls her ugly. Ali realizes Nellie doesn't actually like him as a sudden, clear ding sounding marks the system watching with great anticipation.
A rhythmic, steady step sounding is heard as the Countess and her daughter approach the two girls from further down the path.
Ali breaks into a wide, mischievous grin while still being held, noting the incredible coincidence of the noble's arrival.
A frantic shake sounding continues as Nellie violently rattles Ali while demanding to be heard.
Ali mockingly asks if Nellie is trying to seduce Lord Ramdeo to become a noble and wants her out of the way. Nellie lets out a smug, confident snicker, sounding as she admits Ali is exactly right about her ambitious plan. Bianca watches silently as Ali notes it's a long shot for a commoner like Nellie to marry into the nobility. Nellie dismisses the concern with a sharp, arrogant humph sounding, pointing out that the Countess was once a commoner herself.
A sudden, heavy halt sounding occurs as a hand enters the frame, stopping the girl's confrontation in its tracks.
Ali innocently asks who told Nellie about the Countess's past birth. Nellie lets out a proud, loud shout, sounding as she reveals her mother was the one who told her the secret.
An oppressive darkness looms as Sandra asks if that is truly the girl's low opinion of her.
A quick, terrified turn sounding follows as Nellie realizes the Countess has been standing right behind her the whole time.
Sandra expresses deep offense that a child thinks becoming a countess is easy because of her birth.
A sudden, menacing glare sounding accompanies Sandra's fury as she declares Nellie's mother has no excuse for such gossip. A thunderous, angry shout sounding erupts as the Countess orders both Nellie and her mother to be thrown out of the castle.
Nellie bursts into tears, desperately crying out that she didn't mean what she said.
A heavy, rhythmic drag sounding is heard as two servants haul the wailing girl away from the garden. Ali clenches her fist as the system announces the mission is cleared for dealing with the insignificant villain. Sandra lets out an angry hiss, sounding as Bianca suggests looking on the bright side since the head maid was notoriously corrupt.
Bianca's lips curl into a small, calculating smile as she considers the new opportunity this situation provides.
Ali gives a quick, respectful bow, sounding as she tries to flee back to the kitchen to avoid any more trouble.
Bianca stops her, walking closer with a rhythmic top-top sounding as she addresses her as Ailette Rodeline.
The noble girl offers a soft, pleasant smile as she asks Ali to be her new playmate.
Ali is left completely speechless by the sudden and prestigious request from the Count's daughter. Narrative text explains a rumor among the servants that becoming Lady Bianca's playmate was an impossible task.
Many relatives were invited to play, but every one of them ran away in tears within 3 days.
The servants speculated that the cold girl was a bully who terrified her companions.
In reality, Bianca never hated them and desperately wanted a genuine friend to play with.
Bianca stares at her book, hoping her new companion won't run away like the others before her.
She just wants a smart friend with similar interests, claiming she is more lenient with them than with a future groom. A portrait shows Ali looking back over her shoulder with a warm and gentle smile.
Nellie recalls with horror how Allie got her mother sacked while maintaining a perfectly innocent face.
Bianca thinks Allie's smile won't deceive her before a sudden, quick knock sounding comes from the door. Allie enters the room with a slow, heavy creak sounding, politely greeting Lady Bianca.
Bianca greets Miss Eilette with a calm and welcoming expression.
A heavy, solid thud sounding follows as Bianca sets down a stock of books, declaring they will spend the time reading.
Allie wonders if reading advanced books is what normal playmates are supposed to do together.
She is horrified to see books on investment and economics, wondering who reads such things at age 10.
Bianca looks engrossed with a sudden bright sparkle sounding, and Allie realizes she isn't trying to be cruel.
Allie finds a more interesting novel with a happy, triumphant ta-da sounding as she sees a book about a warrior subduing a demon lord.
A light, quick step sounding follows as Bianca invites Allie to lie down and read whatever she likes. The two girls read quietly on separate sofas in the brightly lit room.
Allie ponders the contents of her book with a quiet sounding. Allie asks if she can choose another book, and Bianca grants her permission.
Bianca watches with a quick glance sounding as the girl walks away to the shelves. The young noble girl reacts with a look of sudden surprise.
Bianca asks why the alchemist's daughter chose to pick up the Bible.
Allie explains she needs scriptural context for literature while Bianca listens intently.
Allie reflects on how religion provides necessary context for art and literature in both worlds.
She realizes she must study local religion to understand the warrior romance novel she found.
Allie lies down with a sad-sounding expression after failing to understand the story's climax.
Bianca is impressed by how the girl identifies what she needs for further understanding.
She finds it remarkable that Allie uses scripture for knowledge rather than faith. Bianca admits her heart fluttered for a second during their interaction as she watches Allie. Allie stares back with an expectant and curious expression.
Bianca suggests trying a different activity after 4 days of reading together.
Allie joyfully agrees, recalling the imaginative games she played with her brother.
She remembers playing complex galactic romances involving both dolls and robots. Bianca goes to fetch the dolls while telling Allie to wait for her.
A sudden bright wow sounding fills the air as the dolls are revealed.
A collection of diverse and expensive-looking dolls is presented for their game. Allie happily prepares to assign roles to the different figures in their new story.
The maid doll and a teddy bear in a suit are ready for play.
The cheating duke and the crafty lover dolls are introduced into the plot.
Allie is confused by the unusual and dark setting Bianca has chosen. A sudden, dramatic da-dun sounding as Bianca orders a doll to be executed for seduction. Narrative notes that sharing similar interests is Bianca's final playmate test that nobody has met.
Most children were terrified by the girl's dark and murderous-sounding games involving broken dolls. A sudden panic dash sounding as a terrified playmate flees the room.
Bianca felt hurt by their rejection and feared Allie would run away too. Allie lifts a doll into the air with a quick raise sounding.
A sudden theatrical da-dun sounding as Allie dramatically claims she has been framed.
A rhythmic, frantic shake sounding as Allie insists nothing happened with the Duke.
Allie shocks the noble girl by claiming the Duke lacks the physical ability for adultery.
Allie uses her knowledge from past life novels to play the victim role perfectly.
Allie voices the Duke doll, claiming adultery is preposterous and begging for release.
A sudden, heavy drag sounding as the lover doll offers to torture the Duke herself.
A long, blood-curdling gah sounding erupts as the doll-based torture begins.
Bianca stares at the pink-haired girl in total disbelief and amazement.
The Duke doll hits the floor with a sudden flop sound air.
Allie wipes her brow, asking if the lady enjoyed the dramatic fainting scene.
A sudden, soft drop sounding is followed by a firm grab sounding of hands.
A sudden, bright sparkle sounding and glitter sounding as Bianca asks to call her Allie.
Bianca realizes she has finally found the one perfect companion she was looking for.
Allie is left completely bewildered by the sudden and intense shift in mood. Allie wonders if her acting was too much, while Bianca offers a friendship nickname.
Allie agrees to drop the formalities and use the nickname for the young lady. Bianca offers a genuine, warm, and happy smile for the first time.
Bianca asks for more details on torture devices, and Allie happily obliges her friend.
The girls walk through the manor, cementing their new and formal friendship.
Allie recalls being impressed by a library book on medieval torture devices some time ago.
Allie spends her time with her new, slightly peculiar friend.
A system notification tracks her daily morning prayer progress as Allie reflects on how useful the Noble Girl's library has been.
Allie asks the sentient system if she can store books from this world in her mental library.
The system agrees with joy, prompting an enthusiastic thanks from the pink-haired girl.
Allie reviews her growing level in cooking and alchemy skills while praying.
She recalls Mademoiselle's persistent plan to marry her off to a high-ranking noble.
A broad grin spreads across Allie's face as she remembers Bianca's biting commentary on the family's young heir.
Bianca shares her ambitious plan to take over the house to restore its former glory as a line of swordmasters.
Allie lets out a cheerful, loud laugh, sounding as she expresses complete confidence in her friend's future leadership.
The girl's expression turns curious as she ponders the details of the original story.
The scene shifts to the vast, quiet shelves of the Count's Manor library.
Allie wonders about the exact cause of the noble family's downfall in the novel. A sudden, heavy flume sounding erupts from a book, radiating a dark, ominous aura.
Bianca offers a rare, soft smile while standing among blooming garden flowers.
The black-haired girl invites Allie to check out the new arrivals in the manor library.
Allie is touched that Bianca waited to explore the books together.
The two girls head toward the library doors with light hearts.
They enter the massive, multi-level library filled with thousands of ancient volumes.
A slow, sharp creak sounding echoes as the girls push open the heavy wooden doors.
Allie gasps in awe as Bianca offers to be her personal guide through the shelves.
Bianca confidently notes her familiarity with the vast collection. An oppressive, heavy loom sounding fills the air as the library atmosphere suddenly shifts toward darkness.
Bianca pauses with a puzzled look, sensing an unnatural change in the environment. She dismisses the unease, focusing on finding specific books about dungeons for her friend.
A rhythmic, steady step-step sounding marks their progress deeper into the dark, narrow aisles.
A quick, light step sounding follows as they move past rows of leather-bound books. The girls continue walking into the shadows of the seemingly endless hallway.
A sudden, sharp halt sounding occurs as Bianca stops in front of a particular section.
Bianca reaches up to pull out a book titled Dungeons, Chasms of the Demon Realm.
A quick, smooth slide sounding is heard as the volume is removed from its place.
Allie clings to her arm, nervously asking if the room is supposed to be this dark.
A sudden, chilling whoosh sounding causes Allie to call out to her friend in alarm.
A violent foosh and swoosh sounding erupts as a dark vortex opens between the books. A sudden, blinding flash sounding consumes the girls as the magical trap is sprung.
A frantic whoosh sounding follows as Bianca's hand makes a firm grab sounding of Allie's.
A sudden, heavy thud sounding echoes as the book falls to the floor of the now empty aisle.
Silence returns to the library as the discarded book lies open on the tiles.
The scene shifts to a surreal, purple sky filled with drifting magical particles.
Bianca lets out a pained, wet cough sounding as she collapses onto the hard ground. Bianca's head begins to wobble sounding as she tries to make sense of her surroundings. The noble girl's eyes widen in total shock at the sight before her.
A sudden, dramatic da-dun sounding accompanies the reveal of a desolate graveyard under a blood-red moon.
Bianca trembles, unable to comprehend how they were transported from the library to this place.
Allie breaks into a cold sweat as the terrifying reality of their situation begins to sink in.
A system notification confirms they have entered an A-class dungeon hidden beneath the castle.
A memory of her brother reveals the tragic fate of the girl who previously entered this sealed dungeon.
Allie is struck by the horrifying realization that today is the day she is scripted to die.
She understands now why Bianca was never mentioned in the novel. They were meant to perish here together.
Bianca whispers that they are trapped and must kill the dungeon master to escape.
As they look out over the tombs, Allie tries to offer comfort through prayer, though her friend admits she has no faith.
Allie believes their salvation has arrived.
She complains about the dungeon difficulty being a mistake. She argues the tutorials should prevent deaths.
Allie tearfully accuses the voice of planning her death once more.
The system prepares to prove its point.
Allie demands compensation for the technical error.
Allie requests either an easy dungeon or massive power.
A sudden, deep rumble sounding and quake sounding as skeletons emerge.
A loud, feral grower sounding as monsters surround the girls. Allie desperately urges the voice to hurry. A sudden, sharp ding sounding as a new skill is granted.
She turns with determination to check the new window.
Allie reacts with utter shock to the skill details.
The skill's potential is far beyond what she expected.
Bianca flinches as a skeleton lunges with a sharp gra sounding.
Allie promises to protect Bianca from the threat.
Bianca tearfully vows to keep Allie safe as well. A dark, swirling shwoom sounding a sinister laughter fills the air.
The master of the dungeon, Necromancer Artemin, reveals himself.
The demon asks if they were sent to sacrifices.
Bianca is stunned by the demon's question.
The demon master watches them with glowing eyes. Bianca offers 100 children in exchange for their freedom.
Artemin agrees but demands Allie stay as his prass.
Bianca refuses and increases her offer despite his distrust. The demon mocks her, expecting betrayal or deception. He sneers, sounding and snickers sounding, telling Bianca to abandon her friend. Artemin commands them to fight like insects for his amusement.
A firm, comforting squeeze sounding as the girls hold hands.
Bianca chooses to stay behind to protect Aang.
Bianca declares that Allie is her cherished friend.
Allie is deeply moved by Bianca's selfless confession. Bianca's hand lets out a soft quiver sounding.
Bianca tells her to leave as she turns away. Allie offers a warm, confident smile to her friend. She turns back toward the demon with renewed strength.
Allie's arm moves with a quick raise sounding.
Allie activates her new transcendent skill, Divine Advent.
A sudden, blinding flash illuminates the dark graveyard. The brilliant light spreads with another sudden flash sounding. Ardaman reels back, claiming such power is impossible.
Ali transforms into a divine being, radiating holy light.
A gentle, airy flutter sounding as her hair glows.
A notification explains she has been removed from rankings.
Ardaman flinches in disbelief at the return of divine power.
Ali's feet leave the ground with a soft float sounding.
Ali smiles as she prepares to use omniscience.
Ali searches the system for the most powerful divine skills.
The demon lord stares at Ali's overwhelming radiance.
Ardaman gathers dark energy with a violent shwoom sounder. A sudden, violent whoosh sounding erupts as the necromancer gathers a massive orb of crimson energy, vowing to kill the girl even as she struggles to move.
A pink system window flickers with complex magical symbols and progress bars. Radiating divine light, the white-haired girl decides to activate her most powerful skill, omnipotence, as a rhythmic beep-beep sounding echoes from her system interface.
A sudden, sharp beep sounding confirms her access is denied because her assimilation level is too low to use the top 10 skills, leaving her frustrated and shouting in protest.
A sudden, terrifying whoosh sounding fills the air as the Demon Master unleashes a barrage of dark energy beams, screaming for the brat to die.
Bianca watches in absolute terror, screaming Ali's name as the dark attack closes in.
The white-haired girl catches a quick glance sounding of her skill list, spotting a powerful siege barrier available at level 15.
Ali shouts for omnipotence once more as a sudden, blinding flash sounding consuming the entire graveyard.
A massive, glowing golden shield manifests as the system confirms the activation of the ultimate siege barrier, leaving Ardaman reeling in shock that a mere child can use a skill beyond even the Pope's current power.
Ali selects her next move from the system list, calling out for the power of divine retribution.
A sudden, sharp crackle sounding and vzz sounding occurs as bolts of blue lightning coil around the girl's outstretched finger. Raging columns of holy electricity strike the undead army with a series of thunderous kroom, boom, and fwoom sounding blasts.
A long, agonizing gah sounding erupts from the necromancer as he is completely engulfed by the divine lightning.
Ali floats calmly in the air above a massive, smoking crater where her enemy lies broken and defeated.
Ali notes with surprise that the demon is still alive as he wheezes out a pained plea for his life. Ali ponders the concept of mercy while the scorched demon continues to beg for his life, letting out a sudden, nervous sweat sounding.
Ali reaches down with a gentle pat sounding on the demon's head, deciding to grant his wish for life in her own unique way.
Ali offers a playful wink sounding in a confident thumbs up, cheerfully promising to heal him right then and there. The Demon Master panics at the mention of healing, desperately trying to stop her before the holy magic touches his corrupted body.
A final, massive gah sounding echoes through the crater as Ali's healing magic proves to be a lethal strike against the dark creature, while she coldly reminds his dissolving remains that he intended to kill them first.
A series of system notifications congratulate Ailette Rodaline for defeating Necromancer Baron Ardaman and officially claiming the underground cemetery as her own territory. The oppressive dungeon atmosphere begins to lift with a soft swoosh and swish sounding as light returns to the area.
Ali gasps with a sudden, surprised whoosh sounding as magical particles swirl around her feet. 2 items appear on the dusty ground, which Ali recognizes as her rewards for defeating the dungeon boss. Ali picks up a book and a leather bag, wondering if they are passive skills or special equipment.
A sudden dual ding sounding confirms she has obtained a Tomb Robber's bag and a passive skill called Infamy in the Realm of the Undead.
Ali tucks the items away, deciding to investigate the mysterious bag and her new reputation among the dead later.
Ali's hair returns to its natural pink as she turns to her friend with a warm smile, reassuring Bianca that the danger has passed.
A sudden firm grab sounding occurs as Bianca seizes Ali's hands, her eyes wide with amazement as she declares her friend a true apostle of God.
Bianca is convinced that Ali's divine power is proof of her holy status, while Ali awkwardly tries to explain that she is simply the first follower of the voice that shapes the world.
Bianca gazes at Ali with deep reverence, believing that God has sent her as a sign of salvation for the entire world.
A sudden rhythmic ding sounding alerts Ali that the holiness of her system has increased along with her favorability rankings, leaving her confused by the sudden shift.
Ali realizes with a start that she has accidentally started a religious following, worrying that her divine mission has turned into a literal pyramid scheme.
Ali begins to wobble, sounding as her vision blurs and her strength finally fails her.
A sudden, heavy flop sounding echoes as Ali collapses to the ground, prompting a frantic scream from Bianca.
Ali realizes she is suffering from a holy fever, cynically noting to herself that such immense power never comes for free.
Bianca catches the falling girl, begging her to wake up, while Ali weakly apologizes and leaves the rest to her friend. Bianca lets out a long, heartbroken sob sounding, vowing that she won't let her newest and most precious friend die.
Allie's consciousness fades as she hears Bianca's voice one last time.
A sudden soft flop sounding marks the end of the battle as the girl drifts into a deep sleep under a clear sky.
A sudden rapid dash sounding and sprint sounding of boots echoes through a distant grand hallway. A sudden collective murmur sounding rises among a group of priests as they sense an intense arrival of divine energy.
A magnificent glow sounding and shine sounding emanates from the grand cathedral's altar as the clergy declares that God has finally descended upon the land. The elderly priests celebrate with a sudden, joyful wow sounding, believing their century-long wait for a prophecy has finally ended.
A young priest reports that the divine advent occurred in the Winchester kingdom rather than their own holy land, sparking intense curiosity among the leaders.
The high priest orders a search party to be gathered immediately to rescue and consecrate their new saint from the land of unbelievers.
A mysterious hooded boy with silver hair watches the commotion in silence, his eyes fixed on the distance.
A rhythmic, steady step sounding carries the silver-haired boy away as he cynically notes that the church is making a fuss over the very thing they once called their only hope.
The boy tells his dark-haired companion that he plans to leave the order for a secular life, while his friend wonders if the religious leaders will ever actually let them go. The black-haired boy sighs, knowing that even if peace arrives, the church will likely keep them as pawns to maintain their influence over other kingdoms.
A sudden, sharp scratch sounding as fingers graze a mysterious cross-shaped mark on a pale arm.
Two priests in white robes watch from a distance, with the black-haired one mocking how the former favorite of God must be green with envy over the appearance of the new saint.
The silver-haired boy offers a calm, knowing smile, sounding warned that such jokes about the 7 deadly sins could lead them into serious trouble.
Irritated by his patronizing tone, the black-haired priest is told by his companion to let it go, noting that such behavior is exactly why he is so favored by their strict religious order. The two companions walk away, with the brown-haired one grumbling that they only have to tolerate him because they lack a skilled tank or healer on their team. A sudden firm press sounding as the silver-haired boy grips his marked arm, thinking to himself that their loose talk really could put them all in danger. Deep within the cathedral, the altar radiates an overwhelming light that feels entirely different from the order's usual power, leading many to believe that the true saint has finally appeared.
A sudden, heavy, lean sounding occurs as someone rests their hands on a stone surface, desperately wondering who this mysterious new presence could be.
The silver-haired boy stares into the distance with intense focus, his mind filled with a single burning question about the identity of the person who manifested such light. Amidst a backdrop of soft flowers, his thoughts linger on the unknown figure as he quietly asks who they really are.
Allie lies pale and motionless in bed, a wet cloth resting on her forehead to combat her high fever.
The pink-haired girl sits up with a pained expression, complaining that she feels completely drained as magical energy crackles around her. A sudden, heavy flop sounding as Allie collapses back onto her pillow, groaning that she feels as though she hasn't slept in over a week. Allie closes her eyes with a faint smile, expressing her deep gratitude to the voice in her head for keeping her alive through the ordeal.
She recalls the immense power she displayed, marveling at her ability to kill an A-class boss in an instant, and wondering if she can now conquer S-class dungeons alone.
Allie lets out a joyful hee-hee sounding while rolling around on her bed, absolutely delighted with the incredible potential of her divine advent skill. Her expression turns thoughtful as she realizes she must find a way to grow stronger through her own efforts rather than relying solely on borrowed power.
Looking out the window at the bright sky, she vows to train and prepare herself to survive in this world without having to depend on any preordained protagonist.
Allie lies on her bed, skeptically comparing the world's faith conversion system to a literal pyramid scheme.
A sudden, sharp clack sounding from the door startles the girl, causing her to sit up in surprise. Bianca enters the room with wide, expressive eyes, shouting with relief that her friend is finally awake. A sudden, rapid dash sounding as Bianca rushes to the bedside, asking Allie how she's feeling after her long collapse. Allie explains that she is fine now that the system penalty has been lifted, but she quickly corrects herself when Bianca asks for clarification, saying she just needed a long sleep. Bianca gazes at her with deep concern, confessing that Allie had been unconscious for 2 full days, and she was terrified for her life. Allie offers a small, appreciative smile while realizing that Bianca has even begun studying medical books just to help her. Recent events lead Allie to a profound realization about the world she now inhabits. Bianca counts on her fingers while listing the essential nutrients Allie needs, showing how much she truly cares for her only friend. A heavy, leather-bound book with a gold cross sits on the desk as Allie reflects on the need to protect the souls of those in this world.
While walking through the garden, the housemates encourage Allie to take a break from her chores and enjoy some sweets to recover from her fatigue.
Back in bed, her brother and father playfully feed her desserts, though Ali makes a face at the bitter taste while they fuss over her recovery. Under a starry night sky, Ali ponders the idea that the people of this world possess genuine souls worth saving.
Ali lies awake, wondering what will happen if the god of this world has truly abandoned its people.
Bianca sits by the bed, her face set in a serious and determined expression. Bianca explains that she didn't want to make any major decisions about the dungeon while Ali was unconscious, prompting Ali to thank her and suggest they keep everything a secret.
Bianca asks Ali if she plans to become a professional dungeon raider when she grows up, given her overwhelming strength.
Ali makes a sour face, admitting that while it's a good way to get stronger, it sounds like an enormous amount of trouble.
Bianca offers to become Ali's aide, promising to handle all the administration and support work so they can stay together even after they grow up.
Ali is deeply moved, prompting a sudden soft rub nuzzle sounding as she hugs Bianca, who calls Ali her most precious friend and savior.
A sudden warm hug sounding and several happy exclamations follow as the two girls express their mutual gratitude to one another. A sudden quick scribble scritch sounding as Bianca takes notes, promising to have the librarian order more books so they can study dungeon mechanics together.
Bianca asks what they should do with the cemetery dungeon, while Ali explains that they have two main options after a boss is defeated. Ali details how they can either leave it open to gather resources since the difficulty has dropped, or permanently close and destroy it if it's too dangerous or empty. Ali thoughtfully concludes that since the library dungeon is just a graveyard full of skeletons, they should probably just close it. Ali asks if it was difficult dragging her home, but Bianca casually replies that it was fine because the skeletons helped her. Ali is stunned to learn that Bianca threatened the surviving skeletons into carrying her, realizing her friend is much tougher than she appears. A sudden, bright realization flashes in Ali's green eyes as she remembers one of her rewards. Ali turns with a quick rummage sounding and fumble sounding, searching her things while Bianca watches with confusion. With a triumphant smile, Ali declares that she has finally found the item she was looking for. Ali holds up a dark, ornate book as a system window identifies it as her new passive skill, Infamy in the Realm of the Undead. Ali stares at the skill book with a wide, excited grin, thrilled that she now possesses the power to inspire infamy and fear among the dead. Ali tells Bianca to come along while the black-haired girl looks on in confusion. Ali runs through a field of flowers, clutching a book to her chest. Two knights cheer for the blonde-haired prince, celebrating their successful return to the castle. The blonde-haired prince thanks his men, prompting a knight to ask what he wishes to do first upon their arrival. The prince declares his desire to try farming, much to the shock of his guards who warn him of the hard labor involved.
He explains that he was deeply moved by the farmers they met and wishes to share his first harvest with his people. A sudden, bright beam sounding of inspiration fills the group as they witness the prince's pure heart. The knights let out a sudden, happy toss sounding as they throw the prince into the air, much to his amused annoyance.
A sudden violent crack and rumble sounding herald the arrival of the demon Artemin amidst rising smoke and lava.
Artemin vows to lead the terrified humans to hell as a sinister energy swirls around the group.
5 skeletons stand together in a barren wasteland with one wearing a distinct red scarf. Ali and Bianca stand triumphantly atop a hill, accompanied by a sudden dramatic dun sounding of resolve.
A sudden, intense dun sounding echoes as Ali sets her sights on the challenge ahead with a determined smirk.
The skeletons begin a sudden, terrified tremble sounding and rattle sounding, feeling completely overwhelmed by Ali's presence.
Bianca asks Ali how they can possibly make money in such a desolate and barren location.
Ali points out the vast land, noting how a sudden, rhythmic clatter sounding of obedient skeletons will serve as her labor force.
Ali reviews a system window offering a non-combat skill package, excited by the prospect of learning alchemy or farming. She resolves to start a farm to grow herbs, calculating that selling custom potions will maximize their profits.
Ali calls out to the voice in her head, but only a sudden, heavy, silent sounding meets her enthusiastic inquiry.
The pink-haired girl wonders if her divine guide is simply too busy to respond to her at the moment. A sudden, quiet mumble sounding of well wishes escapes her as she imagines her guide dealing with other matters.
Ali lets out a sudden, energetic jolt sounding as she orders the skeletons to begin working immediately.
She commands her undead minions to dig tirelessly until they find a water vein to nourish the barren soil.
A sudden, steady shk sounding and clunk sounding fills the air as the skeletons complain about their lack of rest.
The skeletons lament that they have simply traded one tyrant for another as Ali oversees their grueling work.
The red-scarfed skeleton argues that their previous master was far worse, having forced them to kill innocent people.
A grim memory shows the skeletons slaughtering an adventurer, fueling their desire to atone for their past sins.
A sudden, sorrowful hic sounding and rattle sounding of bones follow as the skeletons wonder if they will ever find salvation.
The skeletons begin a sudden, lazy rattle sounding as they slack off, wishing only for proper graves and names.
Allie lets out a sudden, sharp hushing sound as she catches them idling, demanding they get back to work immediately.
The sun begins to set, casting a warm orange glow over the dusty and barren landscape.
A sudden, firm tap sounding of a shovel against the earth marks the end of a long day of labor.
Allie wipes sweat from her brow, satisfied that they have accomplished enough work for one afternoon.
Two skeletons engage in a sudden, curious rattle sounding as they communicate with one another in the twilight.
Allie tells the skeletons to dig 7 graves before stopping, while Bianca watches from near the new stone well.
A sudden, quiet whisper sounding of bones rises as the skeletons worry that Allie intends to fill the graves herself.
Allie calls the skeletons to attention, causing them to stand in a rigid and frightened row.
She explains that since they sleep in graves and there are 7 of them, 7 new plots should be perfect.
The skeletons are stunned by her kindness, their vision filled with the imaginary beauty of roses and starlight.
One skeleton recalls being forced to share cramped graves in the past, making the idea of private plots feel like a dream.
The undead minions hold their faces in joy, overwhelmed by the pink-haired girl's unexpected generosity.
Allie promises that she will even provide tombstones for those who work the hardest in the fields.
She vows to include their names and surround them with flowers, acknowledging that they were once ordinary people with souls.
The skeletons repeat the word tombstones in a state of pure awe and disbelief.
The red-scarfed skeleton is deeply moved by the thought of having his name and flowers displayed for all to see.
A glowing tombstone sits among beautiful lilies as the skeletons reflect on the cruelty of their life as the undead.
The skeletons stare at Allie with profound respect, realizing how much they have misjudged her character.
A divine declaration appears within an ornate frame, proclaiming that the girl is indeed a true saint.
Allie stands with her shovel, glowing with a magnificent divine light as flower petals drift around her.
A sudden, stealthy sneak sounding and step sounding of skeletons approaching causes Allie to ask if they want to be sanctified.
A sudden, strong lift sounding startles Allie as her skeletal laborers hoist her high into the air.
Accompanied by a sudden, rushing, foosh sounding and toss sounding, the overjoyed skeletons celebrate Allie's kindness by throwing her toward the sky.
Bianca watches with a proud smile, noting that she can deduce the skeletons are happy by their gestures and rattling movements, and observes that Allie has already formed a bond with her hired hands. Allie shouts for help, pleading for her friend to stop smiling and warning the skeletons that they might hurt their spines.
A sudden, sharp snap sounding echoes through the sunset as Allie points out that one of the skeletons has already dislocated a bone.
The scene fades into a quiet moment of shimmering light and peaceful introspection.
Time passes in a blur as 3 weeks go by while the sun shines over the developing land.
Allie reflects on a book she read about dungeons, which explained that time passes much faster within their boundaries.
Walking through the lush greenery, Allie explains that accelerated time means harvest seasons will arrive quicker, which is excellent for their business. Since time in the dungeon flows 3 times faster than outside, Allie calculates that they have already reached their 9th week of growth.
She lets out an amazed exclamation as she witnesses the incredible results of their secret farm.
The title of the story appears over a beautiful landscape where plants experience a sudden, gentle sway sounding, and water flows with a quiet trickle sounding.
Allie is overwhelmed by the beauty of the flourishing fields her undead team has cultivated.
The skeletons go about their tasks with a sudden, energetic rattle sounding as they tend to the thriving plants.
Amidst a sudden, busy zoom sounding and clatter sounding, Allie praises the skeletons for transforming the desolate place into a truly beautiful farm. The skeletons present a large basket filled with healthy green herbs with a triumphant ta-da!
Allie asks in disbelief if they've managed to harvest the herbs already, stunned by how quickly they grew.
Allie is crowded by the skeletons offering their full baskets, prompting her to ask if they want her to take all of them.
A sudden, dramatic done sounding accompanies Allie as she effortlessly carries a massive tower of heavy baskets.
Allie lets out a heavy oof sounding as she sets the baskets down, prompting Bianca to ask if her passive fear effect disciplined them or if they just love the farm. Bianca then asks how Allie plans to carry all the produce back.
With a sudden, quick flip sounding of her bag, Allie tells Bianca that where there's a will, there's a way, and asks for everyone's attention.
Accompanied by a sudden, magical fwish sounding, Allie demonstrates how the large basket disappears completely into her small bag.
Allie explains that the bag is another reward from defeating Artemin, earning a sudden, appreciative clap sounding from Bianca, who asks how she did it.
A system window identifies the item as a tomb robber's bag, which contains a massive subspace for bulky items and eliminates all perceived weight.
With a sudden, light top sounding of her feet, Allie resolves to turn the herbs into potions, while Bianca promises to set up a distribution company.
Allie is surprised Bianca wants to distribute them directly, but the black-haired girl explains she can do better than established merchants and asks if Allie wants to see her business plan.
Allie is impressed by Bianca's plan, happy that it allows her to focus entirely on brewing her potions.
Allie thinks about how she might have failed to transmigrate into a peaceful novel about childcare.
Ali celebrates the fact that becoming a rich transmigrator is still within her reach, promising to spend a lot of cash in the item shop if her divine guide is listening. A sudden, clear ding sounding of a notification gets her attention, making Ali look up in surprise.
Amidst a sudden bright flash sounding, a system window appears to check for updates that the transmigrator gods previously mentioned.
Ali tells Bianca she's going to check on the farm again as she happily walks away.
With a sudden, quiet whisper sounding, Ali requests the update log, watching as windows begin to flicker into view. A notification confirms that the Ultimate Library has been upgraded to save all books Ali has read or purchased.
A sudden, soft swish sounding of her finger scrolling through the item shop reveals more updates for her to browse. Ali notices something unusual and pauses to think about what it could be. A sudden, loud dun sounding and heavy but dumb sounding follow as Ali discovers a genre change voucher. She wonders if this means she can use cash to change the theme of her dangerous story. Ali hopes this will finally allow her to live in a romance novel, but she lets out a sudden pained shout when she sees the astronomical price of 10 billion cash. With a sudden quick whip sounding of the window closing, Ali realizes the random result makes the item a mockery of consumers. She notices a limited-time companion growth package that offers skills and rapid growth for rookies with hidden potential.
Ali searches for a hovering icon to mark a suitable target for the growth package.
Ali observes that Bianca doesn't have an icon, likely because the package focuses on combat and labor rather than brainy characters. A sudden, unexpected appearance of a skeleton startles Ali as she continues her search.
The skeleton startles her by offering flower tea, prompting her to thank him for the kind gesture.
Ali's eyes widen in realization as she looks closely at the skeleton standing before her. Another triumphant ta-da sounding accompanies a shimmering light as a pink gem appears. A system identifies the red-scarfed skeleton as Skeleton Surf number 1004.
Ali spots a hovering icon confirming the skeleton possesses a hidden farming skill, suggesting he might have been a druid in a past life.
Ali is stunned that the growth package works on undead creatures, concluding that the skeleton must have been a talented farmer before he died. Ali lets out a sudden, shrill cry of surprise when she sees the 3 million price tag, thinking it's a lot to spend on a skeleton. Despite the cost, the skeleton begins to glow with a magnificent divine light as the upgrade takes effect.
Ali flashes a determined grin at the skeleton, asking if he knows his task and feels certain the investment is worth it as he gives an obedient nod.
Accompanied by a sudden blurring zoom sounding, the red scarf skeleton dashes across the farm with incredible speed. Amidst a sudden rapid pluck sounding and stack sounding, the skeleton harvests herbs and organizes boxes with superhuman efficiency.
Watching from the side, the black-haired girl notes that the skeleton is working very efficiently all of a sudden, and Ali agrees.
Ali reflects on how her passive fear effect ensures the skeleton's obedience and vows not to let the 3 million she invested go to waste, confident that Skeleton Surf 1004 is worth every penny.
Ali continues her thought as she looks forward with a content expression. Accompanied by a sudden busy dig sounding and pot sounding, the red-scarfed skeleton tends to the plants with joy and vigor. The scene shifts to the interior of a grand estate where 2 maids are busy cleaning the polished hallways. Further down the hall, several other servants gather to talk and go about their daily duties.
Ali looks out of a window at the other workers, thinking to herself that the special growth package isn't for everyone.
Ali walks through the corridor, contemplating the logic of finding the right target for her investment. She stops and looks out another window, realizing how difficult it is to find people with hidden potential among supporting characters. A sudden sharp dun sounding and notification chime accompany a shimmering pink gem icon.
Ali's eyes widen as she points excitedly at a pink-haired boy standing outside, stunned to see he has an icon over his head.
With a sudden, firm press sounding of her hands against the glass, Ali watches as a system window flickers over the boy.
Ali stares in awe, realizing that the boy's hidden skill is absolutely amazing. Accompanied by a sudden loud clack sounding and burst sounding, Ali throws open the doors and calls out to the boy. A black boot suddenly comes down with a heavy force on someone's chest. With a sudden, violent crash sounding, a black-haired boy kicks the pink-haired boy to the floor. The black-haired boy stands over his fallen victim and demands that he get up. Accompanied by a sudden, aggressive raise sounding of his wooden practice sword, the black-haired boy declares that their session isn't over yet. Ali is horrified by what she's witnessing, gasping in shock at the display of cruelty.
A sudden, sharp whack sounding echoes through the room.
Ali shouts out, demanding to know what is going on. Amidst a sudden, brutal wham sounding and thwack sounding, the black-haired boy continues to strike the defenseless servant with his wooden sword.
Ali suddenly makes a dash sounding toward the pair, performing a quick block sounding as she shields the pink-haired boy from further harm.
The black-haired boy stops and demands to know who Ali is, then pauses in confusion as he looks closer.
He recognizes Ali, mockingly identifying her as the rotten tomato kid.
With a sudden, dismissive shoo sounding, he tells Ali to get out of the way because he is training his sword skills. A man with a mustache sits nearby with zero interest in the conflict, stating that outsiders are not welcome in the training area.
Ali is incredulous, asking how it can be considered sparring when servants are not allowed to strike back at him.
She glares at the boy with a look of intense anger and determination.
Ali begins to speak, her tone cold and firm.
She bluntly calls his behavior what it truly is, simple assault.
The black-haired boy shouts back, telling her not to be so annoying.
With a sudden, arrogant smirk sounding, he asks Ali if she wants to try fighting him instead.
Ali lets out a sudden, startled flinch sounding as the servant behind her begins a quick rise sounding.
The pink-haired boy steps forward and positions himself protectively in front of Ali, gripping his wooden staff tightly.
He looks at his attacker with a fierce and unwavering gaze.
The black-haired boy falters in surprise, warning the servant not to try and act cool.
Accompanied by a sudden, aggressive swish sounding of his practice sword, he challenges the servant to see how long he can last. He suddenly lets out a startled stumble sounding as someone calls out his name.
A sudden, dramatic dun sounding follows as the black-haired girl appears in the doorway, demanding an explanation for his undignified behavior.
Ali and the boy turn as the girl performs a quick rush sounding toward them, asking Ali if she is all right.
The black-haired girl turns and delivers a piercing glare at the boys.
Amidst a sudden, heavy dun sounding, the girl asks her brother when he will stop acting like an uneducated child, leaving him speechless and groaning.
Panicked, the boy performs a sudden, frantic rush sounding toward his teacher, asking him to confirm that this was just sword training.
The black-haired girl turns her cold gaze to the man with the mustache, asking if inflicting violence on servants is part of his teaching methods.
Ali thanks the girl as she leans in for a sudden, quiet whisper sounding, instructing Ali to take the boy and get his injuries treated.
The black-haired girl warns that her mother will hear about this as Ali helps the limping boy away, leaving the others in a state of panic.
Ali returns to her room and pours out a sudden, rustling scatter sounding of fresh herbs from her bag onto the desk.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy thud sounding and rattle sounding, Prinz looks toward the desk and apologizes, asking Ali if she is angry with him.
Amidst a sudden, aggressive rip sounding and tear sounding, Ali clarifies that her anger is directed at the villain and tells the injured boy to stay still while she prepares a potion.
With a sudden, rhythmic chop sounding of herbs being prepared, Prince watches in surprise and asks if she is making a potion instead of an ointment.
Ali carefully prepares the mixture as a sudden, steady drizzle sounding fills the air. Focused on her work, Ali notes that her father has been teaching her alchemy for a long time.
Ali recalls how her emotional but talented father, a former elite alchemist, lamented her lack of formal schooling despite her genius, though she assured him she was happy.
A sudden, cheerful ding sounding of a system notification offers its congratulations to the young alchemist. Ali feels proud of her progress, realizing that her unique transmigrator perks are providing significant help.
With a sudden, firm squeeze sounding of a cloth, Ali filters the glowing green extract into a small glass. Ali presents the finished potion and tells Prince to drink it all at once, receiving a grateful response.
Prince stares at the glass and begins to hesitate and falter at the thought of drinking the medicine.
Ali asks what the problem is, prompting Prince to groan about how bitter all healing potions usually taste.
Ali insists that the bitterness makes the medicine effective and tries to take it back, but Prince quickly agrees to drink it. As Prince prepares to drink the bitter brew, Ali is suddenly struck by a familiar memory from her past life.
Ali remembers how her brother in her previous life also despised the taste of anything bitter.
She recalls her brother wishing for chocolate-flavored medicine while they sat together at a medical center during their childhood. Ali considers the possibility of making a potion that actually tastes like chocolate milk.
Ali turns her attention back to the various ingredients and specialized bottles resting on her desk.
Standing with confidence, Ali determines that she might actually be able to create such a flavor.
With a sudden, quick snatch sounding, Ali takes the glass back from a startled Prince.
Prince asks if she is truly reclaiming the potion, but Ali tells him to wait just a moment as she goes back to work. A sudden, frantic clatter and rustle follow as Ali grabs a new set of herbs.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy pound sounding and wham sounding, Ali vigorously grinds the ingredients together and mixes them with the liquid. A sudden, loud boom sounding sends a thick cloud of black smoke rising from the glass.
Ali presents the now black liquid with a cheerful smile despite its murky and mysterious appearance.
Prince is horrified to see the potion has turned a deathly shade of black, fearing for his safety.
Appreciating Ali's hard work, Prince takes a sudden deep gulp sounding and forces himself to swallow the dark liquid.
Prince's eyes suddenly widen in pure shock as the taste of the concoction hits his tongue.
Prince is completely amazed and declares that the potion is actually delicious.
The boy stands in stunned silence, overwhelmed by the incredible and unexpected flavor of the medicine.
Ali celebrates her success, and a sudden, hopeful but dumb sounding follows as Prince suggests they could become rich by selling such unique healing potions.
Accompanied by a sudden, soft rub sounding of the glass, Prince praises Ali while lamenting that he only ever shows her his weakest moments.
Ali looks at the boy warmly and insists that he is the one who is truly amazing.
A system window reveals that Prince Hotaline possesses the hidden skill of a swordmaster with the potential to awaken a powerful aura.
Ali reflects on how this significant investment will allow the boy to finally avenge himself. With a sudden metallic clink sounding, Ali tosses her gold coins into the air to purchase the expensive growth package. The scene transitions with a sudden, energetic whoosh sounding as the upgrade takes hold.
Amidst a sudden, sharp clack sounding and thwack sounding, the aggressive sounds of sword training echo through the estate.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy thud sounding, Ramdio groans in frustration after being knocked to the floor by his opponent. Ramdio lets out a sudden, loud wail sounding as he throws a tantrum, unable to understand why he cannot land a single hit.
Prince stands tall with his wooden staff, looking completely stunned by the incredible new prowess he possesses.
Ramdio continues to cry out in anger while Prince rushes over to apologize for accidentally tripping the young lord. Accompanied by a sudden, loud clap sounding and applause sounding, the instructor praises Prince for his incredible and rapid improvement.
The teacher offers detailed advice on stance and technique, which Prince accepts with an obedient nod.
Ramdio yells in anger that he is the one who should be receiving the lessons, but the instructor remains captivated by Prince's rare talent.
Ramdio seethes with jealousy, dismissing the talented boy as nothing more than a good-looking beggar.
With a sudden, aggressive kick and clatter sounding, Ramdio blames his failures on the wooden practice sword he was given.
A dark and calculating thought crosses Ramdio's mind as he continues to blame his equipment for his loss.
The scene shifts to the bright, open sky above the grand estate.
Ali calls out to Prince, asking him to move the shovels indoors as the boy smiles happily.
The man in overalls acknowledges her command. Prince picks up the heavy tools, marveling at how much lighter and stronger his body feels since Ali gave him the mysterious healing potion.
A hand rests on the balcony railing.
Ramdio smirks with malice, thinking to himself that he does not need a sword to successfully eliminate his chosen targets.
Ramdio prepares to drop a heavy flower pot, thinking that the boy below should try his best to dodge the coming strike.
Accompanied by a sudden, lethal whoosh sounding, Ramdio drops the pot and wonders if his victim has eyes in the back of his head.
A sudden, intense flash sounding alerts Prince. Prince smashes the pot midair effortlessly.
Romeo is shocked as Prince moves with a sudden, aggressive swish sounding, displaying reflexes that far exceed his previous capabilities.
Prince swings the shovel with incredible force.
Amidst a sudden, violent shatter sounding, Ramdio screams in pain as dirt and debris fly upward and strike him directly in the face. Prince looks around in confusion and asks if someone is there as a decorative system window appears around him. Accompanied by a sudden rhythmic thump sounding, Ramdio hides in a panic, believing the boy truly has eyes in the back of his head and begging him to stay put.
With a sudden, frantic zoom sounding, Ramdio flees while shouting an apology for his bullying and promising never to bother the boy again. Ali watches the scene with a smug grin, noting that Ramdio's attempt was pitiful and that Prince won't fall for such cheap tricks under her training.
Ali calls out to Prince.
Prince asks what Ali is holding, prompting her to explain that she felt inspired and has been creating various new potions and elixirs. Ali describes her unique potion flavors, including grape juice, coffee, peppermint, and even savory steak. Ali continues her list, mentioning flavors like pasta, smoked salmon, and blueberry muffins that she has successfully bottled.
Ali shoves a medicinal supplement into the boy's mouth, explaining that it will help to replenish his energy. Ali notes that she knows about his late-night training and explains the supplement will fight fatigue, mentioning that even Ramdio uses tonics before asking if he still intends to join the Night Academy.
Prince offers his thanks, but Ali tells him not to worry since the medicine is easy to make and she needs a subject to test her experiments on anyway.
Prince considers that his gratitude stems from much more than just the physical supplements Ali provides.
Prince reflects on how Ali's unwavering belief in him, despite his flaws, pushes him to become a better person every single day.
Accompanied by a sudden, bright beam sounding, Prince smiles warmly and thanks Ali, calling her the best sister he could ever have.
Ali is flustered by the sincere praise.
Ali playfully slaps the boy's back with a sudden rhythmic slap sounding, telling him not to mention it and jokingly demanding he play dolls with her for 100 hours.
Prince halts in his tracks, surprised. Ali panics internally, realizing she accidentally used the same demand she used to give her brother in her previous life. The worker calls out to Prince, asking if he is finished and requesting a hand with the labor.
Prince agrees to help and says goodbye as Ali playfully shoves him along with a sudden quick push sounding.
Ali waves him off with a sudden energetic dash sounding, telling him to forget her earlier request and use all of his time for training.
Prince waves goodbye with a joyful life.
Prince walks away while holding a shovel, wondering why Ali would suggest playing dolls when they have never done so before.
Prince ponders why the thought of her strange request fills him with such a deep and unexpected sense of longing.
The worker calls to Prince again, and the boy shouts back that he is coming.
A sudden rhythmic tap sounding follows.
Allie walks through the quiet hallway. With a sudden, light dash sounding, Allie thinks to herself that she must be very careful not to let anyone discover her identity as a transmigrator. Accompanied by a sudden, rhythmic step sounding and clack sounding, Allie wonders what would happen if she were caught, right before she accidentally runs into an approaching figure.
Amidst a sudden, violent crash sounding, Allie cries out in pain as she falls to the ground.
A purple bottle rolls across the floor.
Allie looks up and apologizes profusely, asking the tall woman if she is all right.
A sudden, firm grab sounding follows.
The mysterious woman picks up the fallen bottle and asks if Allie was the one who created the potion, receiving a nervous confirmation. Accompanied by a sudden, intense stare sounding of her glowing purple eyes, the woman notes that the liquid is most peculiar.
Allie flinches as she feels the woman's gaze piercing through her, and she is shocked when the woman correctly identifies her as Eyelet Rodaline.
The gray-haired woman holds the potion bottle out and reveals that she already knows exactly who Allie is.
Allie is deeply unsettled, sensing that there is something very strange and significant about this mysterious person. Allie gazes up at the mysterious woman.
The mysterious woman looks back with a sudden, surprised ha sounding. A woman in a red gown rushes into the hall with a sudden, energetic rush sounding to welcome the visitor. Bianca hides behind the woman's skirts with a fearful expression. Allie pauses as a sudden, contemplative realization begins to take hold.
Allie wonders if the woman before her is actually the legendary Cardelia Gillette. Allie recalls that the woman was a prominent and solemn cardinal in the original novel.
The girl remembers that this legendary figure possessed a truly unique and special ability.
Allie gazes out the window, reflecting on how interesting that specific power was described in the story.
Allie watches the group walk away, finally understanding the reason for the cardinal's intense gaze.
Seeing such an important character in person is a fascinating experience for the young transmigrator.
As a system notification notes the god's pleasure, Allie wonders if the hero will match her imagination.
She excitedly envisions a protagonist with brilliant silver hair and breathtakingly handsome features. Allie explains to the system that while she wants to see him, the tutorial period keeps her restricted.
Allie crosses her arms, considering the limitations of her current situation.
Her thoughts are interrupted by a sudden, rhythmic click-sounding and clack-sounding of approaching feet. Bianca approaches a closed door with a sudden, soft step sounding. Accompanied by a sudden, repetitive knock sounding, Bianca asks if Allie is currently inside.
Allie welcomes Bianca in, surprised the girl isn't in the garden with the prestigious guest.
Bianca sadly claims the family is better off without her, leaving Allie completely confused. Bianca explains that the cardinal has always ignored her and avoided any form of eye contact.
Despite the cold treatment, Bianca believes there must be a secret reason behind her grandmother's behavior.
Allie gazes at her young friend with a heart full of deep concern.
Allie realizes Bianca is defending her grandmother despite the pain she has been forced to endure.
With a sudden, firm grab sounding, Allie declares that Bianca deserves a much better life. The door opens with a sudden, sharp creak sounding as a man enters to find Allie. The man is surprised to find Lady Bianca in the room while he was looking for Allie.
Bianca is bewildered to hear that her grandmother has requested a private meeting with Allie.
Allie reflects on how noble prejudices have made life difficult for both her and little Bianca.
The young girl trembles with a sudden, involuntary shudder sounding as she recalls her mother's words. Bianca begs to accompany her friend, but the man insists the cardinal wants a solo meeting.
Allie offers a reassuring touch before heading out to meet the mysterious guest.
The cardinal stands alone in the garden, waiting patiently for the girl to arrive.
The woman turns slightly and acknowledges that Allie has finally come to meet her.
Allie steps forward as the woman calls out her full name with a sense of authority. Amidst a sudden, brilliant sparkle sounding and shocked gasp sounding, Allie stares at the massive feast. Allie is overwhelmed by the amount of food, wondering how many people could be fed by this spread.
The cardinal begins the conversation by noting that Allie and Bianca seem to be very close.
The woman bluntly asks about the true nature of Allie's relationship with her granddaughter.
Allie is taken aback by how directly the woman addresses the situation without any hesitation.
Allie steadies herself and prepares to explain the deep bond she shares with the young lady.
Accompanied by a sudden, joyful beam sounding, Allie proudly declares that they are the best of friends.
Allie gushes about how smart and kind Bianca is, having read every book in the entire manor.
She adds that Bianca knows everyone's name and has even saved Allie from trouble in the past.
Allie continues her praise, noting Bianca's incredible skill with numbers that surpasses most adults.
The cardinal's face twitches with a sudden, subtle tremble, sounding as Allie realizes the woman is actually proud. Allie suggests the cardinal actually came to see Bianca, prompting the woman to ask for her reasoning.
Allie drops a bombshell, suggesting the woman was actually anticipating that Bianca would pass away.
A heavy and tense silence falls over the garden as the cardinal stares back.
Allie points out that the woman rushed to the estate today for a very specific purpose.
Bianca listens from the shadows as Ali reveals that the girl's survival was completely unexpected.
Madame Gillette stares at the pink-haired girl, realizing Ali is far from an ordinary child.
Ali sits calmly amidst the grand feast, returning the cardinal's intense gaze with a steady look of her own. A close-up of a purple eye reveals the gears of destiny, signifying the legendary woman was born with the eyes of fate. Standing before massive celestial gears, the text explains the eyes of fate allow one to see both a person's age and their remaining time.
The woman looked upon her beloved granddaughter as a baby and saw exactly how many years the girl was destined to live.
Ali explains she finally understands why a high-ranking cardinal would bother to remember the name of a lowly servant girl.
Ali reveals the truth. Madame Gillette and Bianca were fated to die on the very same day.
Amidst a sudden heavy clunk sounding, the cardinal stands up in shock and asks how the girl could possibly know such a secret.
Ali notes that those who possess the eyes of fate are granted a unique privilege. Ali continues, explaining that those with the power can neither intervene in the fates of others nor speak of what they have seen. The text notes that because of this restriction, the woman had to brace herself to bid farewell to her granddaughter in total isolation.
Madame Gillette looks away with a somber expression, her face etched with years of hidden grief and silence.
The woman turns her back, walking away into a desolate white void of lonely resignation. Ali tells the woman that she no longer has to turn her back on Bia because the girl's lifespan has actually increased.
Madame Gillette looks back with a cold sweat, demanding to know Ali's true identity.
Ali remains seated, watching the cardinal with a calm and knowing expression. Accompanied by a sudden, sharp beep sounding, a system notification announces that the advocate of confidentiality has been dispatched.
Amidst a sudden, intense glare sounding, a message notes a new god is watching Ali with sharp eyes while she finds his stare overwhelming.
Ali looks incredibly nervous and sweaty, trying to find a way to deflect the cardinal's questioning.
Madame Gillette closes her eyes and tells the girl that she doesn't actually need to explain herself. The woman reveals her glowing purple eyes, stating that she already knows the truth because she can see it.
Gillette notes an unnatural number floating above Ali, realizing no human could live out that many years in a single lifetime.
The woman asks if Ali is a returnee and if that is how she knew the future and managed to change Bia's fate. Madame Gillette looks at Ali with a softened expression, acknowledging that the girl is the one who saved her dear Bia. Ali looks on as the cardinal speaks her full name, Ailette Rodeline, with a new sense of profound respect.
Ali addresses the woman by her title, Madame Gillette, as the tension in the garden begins to fade.
Sunlight filters through the garden's white pillars as the two continue their private conversation.
Ali explains that Bianca is a faster thinker than most adults and is so inquisitive that she has read every book in the manor. Ali beams with a bright smile, surrounded by blooming flowers as she continues to praise her friend's character. Madame Gillette offers a rare and gentle smile, her previous coldness replaced by a look of quiet peace. Gillette stands by the table and tells Ali that she cannot thank her enough for what she has done.
Looking at the spread of sweets, the woman admits she never should have treated her granddaughter so coldly.
Madame Gillette looks away, full of regret as she realizes she should have held on to the girl's little hands.
A sudden, soft rustle sounding from the bushes catches the cardinal's attention as she turns her head.
Accompanied by a sudden rhythmic step sounding, Bianca emerges from the greenery and calls out to her grandmother.
Madame Gillette is visibly startled, asking how long the young girl has been standing there.
Ali sits back with a smug expression, thinking to herself that the mission has been a total success from the very start.
Bianca asks if it's true that she was shunned all this time simply because she was destined to die young.
Madame Gillette looks down with a pained expression and offers a sincere apology to her granddaughter. The woman trembles as she admits that as a grandmother, she never spoke a sweet word or gave a warm embrace. Amidst a sudden, tight hug sounding, Bianca rushes forward and clings to her grandmother in a desperate embrace. Bianca cries into the woman's dress, telling her how glad she is to know that her grandmother doesn't actually hate her. Madame Gillette looks down at the sobbing child with tears welling in her own eyes. The cardinal kneels on the ground to fully return the embrace, finally holding the granddaughter she thought she would lose. Ali watches the emotional reunion with her chin resting on her hands, satisfied with the outcome she orchestrated. Accompanied by a sudden light step sounding, Madame Gillette walks over to Ali and addresses her by her full name. The cardinal bows her head slightly, telling Ailette that she is greatly indebted to her for saving Bianca. Accompanied by a sudden bright sparkle sounding, Gillette holds up her golden cross and hopes Ali will always remain Bia's good friend. Amidst a sudden rhythmic clack sounding, Ali clasps her hands together and enthusiastically promises that she will. Gillette offers to grant Ali anything else she might want, but the girl insists she is just happy to see them both happy. Ailette experiences a sudden, sharp realization. The young girl announces she has a specific request. Eilette declares her desire to visit the Vatican. She recalls a helpful hint about leaving the tutorial area. Madame Gillette agrees to arrange the trip during the day of sacrifice.
Eilette notes that a new quest is being granted through divine authority.
The pink-haired girl is thrilled that her plan was successful. She reflects on finally being able to leave the manor.
Eilette anticipates meeting someone who has caused her much frustration.
She spots the young male protagonist sleeping behind a window.
The white-haired boy rests peacefully with a somber expression.
The scene transitions through a soft flurry of white blossoms.
A title card announces the perks of being an S-class heroine.
Madame Gillette prepares to depart the estate as servants pack belongings.
The cardinal instructs Eilette to finish her goodbyes perkly.
Eilette stands with her father and brother to bid them farewell.
Eilette's father offers overprotective traveling advice while she insists she is mature.
Bianca arrives and teasingly reminds Eilette that she is still a child.
Bianca expresses her regret that she cannot join the group this time.
Accompanied by a sudden, soft whisper sounding, Bianca notes Eilette's excessive luggage.
Eilette dismisses the observation, claiming she simply got overexcited for the trip. She privately admits that Bianca's concerns about the journey are valid.
Narrative text explains the world as an S-class novel despite the tutorial's low difficulty.
Ornate iron gates stand before the dangerous world beyond the castle.
Eilette feels reassured knowing the protagonist's time loops haven't started yet.
A maid approaches the two girls with a small gift box.
Bianca presents a box filled with colorful, delicious-looking macarons. Eilette enthusiastically thanks her friend for the thoughtful parting gift.
Accompanied by a sudden, low whisper sounding, Bianca reveals she knows Eilette is a returnee. Amidst a sudden, heavy stare sounding, Eilette nervously defers the secret conversation.
A servant shouts that the group is officially setting off.
Madame Gillette tells Eilette to stay close for the teleportation.
Accompanied by a sudden, low vroom sounding, a man activates a glowing blue crystal.
The teleportation stone shatters as intense magical energy fills the air.
Eilette shields her eyes from the blinding flash of white light.
Accompanied by a sudden loud whoosh sounding, the scene shifts to the Vatican.
Eilette takes a moment to recover from the disorienting magical travel.
The girl looks up to see the grand towers of the Holy City.
Eilette is awestruck by the massive, sprawling architecture of the Vatican.
Madame Gillette explains that the large crowds are there for the day of sacrifice.
The cardinal notes that children are present to test their potential as stigma bearers.
Madame Gillette instructs Eilette to follow her closely through the plaza. The pair walks through the bustling corridors of the grand institution.
Two young apprentices in white robes discuss the high number of applicants.
The black-haired boy cynically dismisses the idea of divine power awakening in children.
The blonde apprentice notes that only homeless orphans remain behind. The black-haired boy is distracted by someone standing in the hallway.
Accompanied by a sudden, soft clasp sounding, the white-haired protagonist prays silently.
The white-haired boy explains he was praying for the children outside.
The black-haired boy mocks him for praying in such a futile manner.
The white-haired boy stands in the grand hallway and firmly rejects his companion's cynical outlook.
The black-haired boy stares back with a suspicious and unimpressed expression.
Amidst a sudden, intense throb sounding, a close-up reveals a red, painful glow emanating from the boy's clutched wrist.
Accompanied by a sudden, low vzz sounding, followed by a soft vzz, several glowing virtues appear in the air as the boy looks out at the holy city.
Amidst a sudden, sharp fsh sounding, the words for humility and kindness dissolve and are replaced by pride and envy in a harsh red font.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy grit sounding, the white-haired boy clenches his jaw in visible frustration at the shifting status.
Amidst a sudden, sad droop sounding, the white-haired boy looks away and dismisses his companion's question about his behavior. The black-haired boy tells his peer to stop wasting time and move along through the palace corridors.
Madame Gillette leads Eilette into a large room, explaining that the Vatican serves very simple and modest meals.
Eilette looks at a dejected child eating a meager meal and privately thinks the food looks more like poverty than modesty. Amidst a sudden rapid dash sounding, an attendant rushes forward to address Madame Gillette with high priority. Madame Gillette looks troubled by the interruption, but Eilette brightly insists that she will be perfectly fine on her own.
The cardinal instructs a man named Pavel to take over the tour and show the young girl around the institution.
Madame Gillette walks toward a massive, ornate wooden door to attend to her official business.
Pavel stands awkwardly before Eilette as he prepares to begin the reluctant tour.
Accompanied by a sudden, swift zoom sounding, Pavel points her toward a group of children and quickly disappears.
Eilette realizes the man just wanted to dodge babysitting duty, but she is actually relieved to be unsupervised.
Amidst a sudden, energetic dash sounding, Eilette runs off toward her own secret mission.
Accompanied by a sudden, rhythmic step sounding, Eilette explores a lush garden while reflecting on the rare herbs hidden there.
The pink-haired girl spots her target and cheers in triumph as she finds exactly what she was looking for.
Narrative text explains that the specific plant she found will be vital for curing a future continent-wide plague.
Eilette giggles with a mischievous expression, dreaming of the massive fortune she will make by selling the cure.
Amidst a sudden, busy pluck sounding, Eilette begins harvesting the herbs while celebrating her profitable plan.
Accompanied by a sudden, gentle top sounding, Eilette is startled by a finger touching her shoulder as she tries to hurry. Eilette turns around to find the white-haired boy kneeling on the grass right in front of her. A close-up highlights the boy's striking appearance, including his silver hair and a small smudge of dirt on his face.
The two children sit in the sunlit garden, staring at each other in a moment of quiet surprise.
Eilette stares in awe as she realizes she is looking directly at the male protagonist.
Accompanied by a sudden, light lean sounding, the boy moves closer while Eilette notes his brilliant silver hair. The boy speaks softly, his eyes shifting between blue and turquoise as he observes the young girl. Amidst a sudden, soft wipe sounding, the boy uses his thumb to gently clean a smudge of dirt from Eilette's cheek.
Narrative text emphasizes the boy's breathtakingly good looks as he offers a kind gesture to a stranger. The boy asks if she is a thief, while Eilette's internal dialogue confirms his identity as Tessalid Argente.
Eilette is overwhelmed by sudden pressure and stress as divine messages warn her not to spoil the story for the protagonist.
Eilette looks incredibly annoyed by the constant nagging of the gods while Tessalid watches her odd reaction. Tessalid looks down at his hand in silence, appearing somber and distant.
The boy tells Eilette not to overreact, stating that his kindness is simply a result of his moral obligations. Eilette looks at him with a knowing gaze, fully aware of the secrets behind his peculiar personality.
An infographic explains Tessalid's unique ability, where practicing virtues strengthens his power, while succumbing to sins weakens it.
Tessalid looks gloomy and asks why he is the only one who must bear such restrictive burdens. Eilette reflects on the fact that the boy has already mentioned his moral obligations multiple times.
Accompanied by a sudden, light scratch sounding, Eilette tries her best to act clueless and innocent.
Tessalid explains he was drawn to the area by the sense of a holy relic, and he didn't expect to find her there. The boy reaches out and identifies the golden pendant hanging around the girl's neck. He reveals that the cross is actually the holy relic of Saint Agnes, a famous hero of the past. Eilette is shocked to realize that the gift Madame Gillette gave her is a priceless historical artifact. Accompanied by a sudden, thoughtful lean sounding, Tessalid studies Eilette more closely.
He bluntly states that he cannot sense much divine power coming from her despite the relic she carries.
Amidst a sudden, intense stare sounding, the boy asks why she has a holy relic, causing Eilette to flinch and start explaining.
The two children sit together in the peaceful garden as the initial tension of their meeting begins to settle. Seeing the boy is hungry, Eilette offers him something to eat, causing him to flinch.
Tessalid looks embarrassed as he explains he was just heading to the dining hall.
Back in the hallway, the black-haired apprentice wonders where his companion has disappeared to.
Eilette gives a bright smile while telling the boy there is no reason to feel ashamed.
As the boy turns away in a blush, Eilette playfully notes how adorable his reaction is.
Her attention is taken by a sudden, light extend sounding as she offers him a colorful macaron.
Tessalid declines the treat, stating he is forbidden from eating such things before leaving for his group.
Eilette is momentarily stunned by the boy's mention of having friends.
Amidst a sudden, quick spring sounding, Eilette jumps in surprise while Tessalid clarifies his intent.
Eilette reflects on the original novel's tragic backstory regarding the boy's childhood.
Narrative text reveals that Tessalid was the only survivor of a horrific dungeon collapse.
Eilette is haunted by the realization of the suffering the boy endures every year.
Tessalid notices her somber mood and asks what is troubling her in the middle of the garden.
Accompanied by a sudden, low rumble sounding, the apprentices in the hallway are startled by a strange noise.
A floating message warns of the arrival of the dungeon sink.
Amidst a sudden, heavy quake sounding, Eilette panics as she realizes the tragic event is happening ahead of schedule.
Accompanied by a sudden, loud crash sounding, the ground gives way and pulls the children into the abyss.
Divine notifications fill the air as the gods argue over the timing of this sudden disaster.
Amidst a sudden, tight grab sounding, Eilette and the boy reach out to one another as they fall.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp yank sounding, Tessalid pulls Eilette close and commands her to stay by his side.
Other terrified children are consumed by the swirling red void as they scream for help.
The world disappears into a sudden deep whoosh sounding as the group is transported.
Eilette groans in pain while waking up in a dark, unfamiliar place.
Accompanied by a sudden rhythmic chuff sounding, the girl finds herself surrounded by festive holiday decorations.
Amidst a sudden heavy da-dun sounding, Eilette looks around a room filled with gifts and toys.
She is filled with dread as she realizes she has been dragged into the heart of the dungeon.
A notification confirms they have entered the Toy Mansion, an infamous S-Class dungeon.
Accompanied by a sudden, quick smack sounding followed by a soft slap, Eilette realizes she is accidentally sitting on Tessalid.
A young girl in the distance wonders at the massive collection of toys filling the chamber.
Tessalid shouts a warning, telling the other children not to touch anything within the dangerous mansion.
Amidst a sudden, low womb sounding, an ominous voice welcomes the children to their new home. A demonic figure emerges from a swirling red vortex, introducing himself to the terrified crowd.
The man identifies himself as Rodrigo, the butler serving the master of the mansion.
Tessalid and Eilette watch warily as the butler invites them to play and have fun. A title card announces the perks of being an S-class heroine.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy step sounding, the sinister butler approaches the group of orphans.
The children watch with bated breath as the butler looms over the mountain of presents.
Rodrigo puts on a friendly facade while asking the hungry children if they would like a snack.
Accompanied by a sudden, clear ring sounding followed by a light jingle, the butler signals for his servants.
Small doll-like figures emerge with a sudden rhythmic top sounding to serve the children food.
Rodrigo encourages the children to eat their fill and pick out any toys they desire.
A curious boy asks if the food is safe to eat and finds the taste delicious.
Tessalid frantically screams for the children to stop eating the demonic food. The boy begins to choke and cough violently after consuming the demon's offering.
Amidst a sudden, heavy thud sounding, the boy collapses to the floor in agony. The child slumps over as he loses consciousness, leaving the others in a state of shock.
Accompanied by a sudden light splatter sounding followed by a soft poof, the boy's body vanishes and is replaced by a bunny plushie.
Eilette stares in horror at the small stuffed toy that was just a living child.
Her attention is taken by a sudden, sharp ding sounding as a system window appears above her.
The status effect window explains that dying souls in this mansion are transformed into plushies to be harvested.
Eilette realizes the horrific truth about the dolls.
Creepy, blood-stained dolls watch with hollow eyes.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy bam sounding, terrified children scream and bang on the locked door.
Amidst a sudden, roaring flume sounding followed by a rhythmic voom and shwoom, the butler declares that only the final survivor will be spared.
Eilette notes that a new quest has appeared while she recalls the details of the original story.
A system window outlines the S-rank quest Count Orshi's Mercy, where survival depends on being the only one left alive.
Narrative text explains that being the sole survivor was how the young Tessalid originally endured this dungeon.
Accompanied by a sudden light bump sounding, Eilette is jolted by the frantic movements of the other children.
Amidst a sudden, clumsy stumble sounding, a panicked boy tells the pink-haired girl to stay away from him.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp splatter sounding followed by a soft plop, a child screams as they are violently transformed into a plushie.
Amidst a sudden, heavy thump sounding, a child's shoe remains near a fresh bloodstain.
Accompanied by a sudden, high-pitched beep sounding followed by a dull thump, a warning window detects excessive violence during the tutorial period. Amidst a sudden, heavy thump sounding followed by a quick spring, the system mitigates Eilette's mental shock while she suddenly leaps up with a massive gift. Accompanied by a sudden, loud wham sounding, Eilette smashes a monster clown with a giant gift box to save a blonde girl.
Amidst a sudden, swift swish sounding, Eilette commands the terrified girl to either flee or defend herself.
Tessalid watches the pink-haired girl's sudden intervention with wide-eyed surprise. Accompanied by a sudden, sharp jolt sounding followed by a low creak, the blonde girl cowers while other orphans try to force the doors.
Amidst a sudden, chaotic burst sounding followed by a frantic rush, the children scream while running for their lives.
Accompanied by a sudden, relieved woo sounding, Eilette thanks her support system for helping her save her ultimate skill for the boss.
Eilette resolves to handle the current chaos without using her most powerful ability unless it becomes absolutely necessary.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp whoosh sounding, Eilette screams a warning to Tessalid as a giant clown looms behind him with a scythe. Amidst a sudden, metallic clash sounding followed by a slow creak, Tessalid blocks the scythe and prepares a holy condemnation attack.
Accompanied by a sudden, massive whoosh sounding, a wave of blue divine energy erupts from the boy's wooden staff.
Amidst a sudden, quick dash sounding, Eilette sighs in relief while Tessalid asks how she managed to know his name. Eilette tries to offer a logical explanation for her warning, but the boy quickly dismisses her excuses. Tessalid stands in silent contemplation after finishing the battle. Eilette realizes she made a mistake by using his name too early.
Accompanied by a sudden, rhythmic waddle sounding followed by a light toddle and sharp clap-clap, the butler orders his servants to retrieve the escapees.
Tessalid tells the pink-haired girl that they need to stop talking and focus on leaving the area.
Accompanied by a sudden, rapid sprint sounding, the two children flee as the clowns pursue them. Amidst a sudden, swift dash sounding followed by a frantic rush, the hallway is littered with the plushy remains of fallen children. Accompanied by a sudden, slow creak sounding, hands pull a door shut to hide from the danger.
Tessalid suggests they remain hidden in the closet until the clown servants pass by.
Amidst a sudden, sharp gasp sounding, followed by a heavy wheeze and various panting noises, Tessalid asks if she is all right while Eyelet struggles to breathe.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy wheeze sounding, followed by a sharp huff, a system message mocks Eyelet for her lack of stamina despite her high rank.
Eyelet spots blood seeping through the silver-haired boy's sleeve.
Accompanied by a sudden, light reach sounding, Eyelet notices the wound is infected with a dangerous, decaying poison.
Amidst a sudden, firm grab sounding, Tessalid catches her hand as she tries to examine his injury.
Tessalid stares at the young girl with a look of intense suspicion.
Eyelet complains that he is squeezing her hand so hard that she feels like a villain.
A close-up highlights the boy's piercing blue eyes as he remains silent. Accompanied by a sudden, tight squeeze sounding, Tessalid demands to know her identity and how she knows his name.
The two children sit close together in the dark closet, locked in a tense standoff.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp yank sounding, Eyelet pulls his arm closer and insists that his injury must be treated immediately.
Amidst a sudden, light fumble sounding, followed by a quick rummage, Eyelet warns him that the poison will rot his arm if he ignores it. Accompanied by a sudden, quick raise sounding, Tessalid is baffled by her knowledge as she produces a glowing green potion.
Eyelet tells him to stop acting tough and drink the antidote for the decaying poison.
Tessalid expresses confusion over her vast knowledge and resources, while Eyelet playfully asks if he has more questions.
The boy admits that he finds one specific thing very strange.
Amidst a sudden, soft mumble sounding, Tessalid notes that her presence strangely does not cause his divine power to weaken.
Eyelet wonders if Tessalid is referring to the divine commandments that don't apply to her.
Eyelet recalls Tessalid mentioning his obligation to be kind and notes his use of forbidden terms.
Accompanied by a sudden, light lean sounding, followed by a soft rub, Tessalid explains his divine power grows through kindness.
Amidst a sudden, bright shimmer sounding, Tessalid shows the glowing holy mark on his wrist to prove his point.
Accompanied by a sudden, enthusiastic wow sounding, Eyelet celebrates bypassing the system as the gods argue over the fairness of her perks.
Eyelet reads further notifications as various gods express their support or jealousy regarding her S-class status.
Amidst a sudden, intense stare sounding, the silver-haired boy demands to know the girl's true identity. Accompanied by a sudden, firm pat sounding, Eyelet declares her identity is a secret she cannot share.
Amidst a sudden, light push sounding, Eyelet stops the boy's protest and promises to clarify one important fact.
The pink-haired girl looks Tessalid in the eye and assures him she is on his side. Tessalid stands frozen in shock by her unexpected declaration of loyalty. Accompanied by a sudden, rhythmic rustle sounding, followed by a quick rummage, Eyelet reaches into her bag for something helpful.
Amidst a sudden, grand, abundant sounding, Eyelet presents a massive feast to ensure the hungry boy is ready for battle. The young girl beams with a joyful, innocent smile. Tessalid stares in bewilderment at the literal mountain of food she just produced.
Accompanied by a sudden, tight squeeze sounding, Tessalid concludes she cannot be evil because the holy relic reacts peacefully to her.
Amidst a sudden, heavy push sounding, Eyelet prepares to leave, while the boy finally asks for her name.
She introduces herself as Eyelet Rodolin and invites him to use her first name.
Accompanied by a sudden, low, awkward sounding, Tessalid begins eating and shyly thanks her for the provisions.
Eyelet finds the boy's sudden shyness incredibly cute and adorable.
Accompanied by a sudden, slow creak sounding, the girl outlines her plan to find her friends and confront the dungeon boss.
Eyelet insists on accompanying him to provide medical support, though Tessalid fears for her safety. The girl argues that joining the fight is better than waiting to die with the other children. Amidst a sudden, low vroom sounding, followed by a sneaky smirk, Eyelet privately plans to use the boy for a free ride to the boss.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp crackle sounding, the children's attention is caught by the butler's voice over the mansion's intercom.
Rodrigo monitors the survivors on screens while mocking the silver-haired boy's perceived weakness.
The butler announces a mandatory feast in the banquet hall as the remains of children litter the stairs.
Rodrigo casually lounges while ordering the children not to be late for their final meal.
The butler explains the mansion's heating system while terrified orphans hide beneath the furniture.
Rodrigo warns that every fireplace is connected to a lethal living flame known as hellfire.
The butler reveals that the entire mansion will soon be consumed by fire, except for the banquet hall. Accompanied by a sudden, sharp click sounding followed by a quick rummage, Tessalid realizes the banquet food is likely drugged.
Eyelet recalls the original story where the children are driven into a murderous frenzy by the tainted food.
The girl envisions the bloody massacre that occurs when the children lose their minds, while Tessalid asks how she possesses such dark knowledge.
Accompanied by a sudden, swift turn sounding, Eyelet dismisses the boy's questions and focuses on preventing the tragedy.
Amidst a sudden, frantic shake sounding followed by a light scatter, a pile of green plants is prepared for use.
Accompanied by a sudden, wide grin sounding, Eyelet excitedly invites Tessalid to go play with fire.
A white-gloved hand checks a golden pocket watch as the deadline approaches.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp snap sounding, Rodrigo declares that the time for the plan has arrived.
Amidst a sudden, heavy step sounding, followed by a slow creak, the butler enters a hidden chamber to wake his servant, Helveros. Accompanied by a sudden, low flicker sounding, followed by a roaring blaze, a demonic skull ignites into a massive spirit of fire.
Amidst a sudden, light wipe sounding, Rodrigo issues his orders while the fire demon complains about its intense hunger. The butler offers a corpse for food, but the demon reveals its unexpected preference for a vegetarian diet.
Accompanied by a sudden, furious arg sounding, Rodrigo berates the demon for its pathetic habits and threatens it with permafrost. Accompanied by a sudden loud slam sounding, the butler departs after demanding his bathwater be kept at a demonic temperature. Amidst a sudden, light squirm sounding, followed by a slow wriggle, Alvaros grumbles about its cruel employer and constant starvation.
Accompanied by a sudden, slow dawdle sounding, the fire spirit laments its long history of eating nothing but old bones. Amidst a sudden, light scatter sounding, the demon's wish for plants is granted as fresh leaves rain down upon it.
The fire demon stares in wide-eyed shock at the sudden appearance of its favorite food. Accompanied by a sudden, heavy dun sounding, Helveros looks on with pure joy as it realizes it is surrounded by delicious plants. Accompanied by a sudden, massive foosh sounding, Helveros joyfully declares it is having its first proper meal in 2 centuries.
Eilette and the silver-haired boy watch from the shadows as she celebrates the fire demon's plant party.
A blonde-haired boy enjoys a dessert.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp slap sounding, followed by a quick wish, a black-haired boy knocks away the food while Ephael cries out in protest.
The black-haired boy claims he only wanted to see the demon's effects on the food, while Ephael questions his true motives.
The black-haired boy notes that his companion doesn't need to eat the meal to see its effects.
Amidst a sudden, sharp shriek sounding followed by a heavy crash and rhythmic clatter, the black-haired boy points out the chaos among the other children. Accompanied by a sudden, rapid dash sounding, the black-haired boy identifies the food as a hallucinogen as a child suddenly attacks them.
Ephael catches the child's stabbing arm.
Accompanied by a sudden, light tremble sounding, Ephael asks for a blessing while his friend questions using divine power on a child.
Ethel argues that the frenzied boy looks more like a demon than a child.
A monstrous child snarls with rage.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy burst sounding followed by a sharp clatter and metallic clang, the butler enters the room and notes the progress of the chaos.
Amidst a sudden, heavy crash sounding, followed by a dull thud and sharp shatter, Rodrigo describes the violent feast as a mealtime of insanity.
Accompanied by a sudden, massive whoosh sounding, the butler cackles and encourages the children to stab each other affectionately as green smoke erupts from the fireplace.
Rodrigo is outraged at being covered in filth and demands that Helveros come out immediately.
Accompanied by a sudden, light whoosh sounding followed by a soft whoosh, the blue fire spirit apologizes for its lack of control over the smoke.
The butler wipes himself clean while growing suspicious of the strange color of the demon's flames.
Discarded silverware clatters to the floor. Amidst a sudden, heavy keg sounding followed by a sharp cough and light clegg, the children regain their senses and cry over their injuries.
The black-haired boy observes in surprise as the hall full of children suddenly snaps out of their frenzy.
Rodrigo falters in shock as he demands an explanation for the sudden change.
Accompanied by a sudden, swift turn sounded by a light flinch, the butler notices strange weeds burning in the fireplace.
Rodrigo demands to know what the hesitant fire demon ate.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy step sounding, the fire spirit begins a stuttering apology.
Accompanied by a sudden, light toss sounding, Rodrigo throws the demon aside and realizes the truth.
Amidst a sudden, light rustle sounding, the butler discovers that Helveros ate an antidote herb. Rodrigo rages at the demon for spreading antidote fumes throughout the manor instead of working.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy stomp sounding, followed by a sharp wham, smash, and soft fsh, followed by a light clack, the butler crushes the demon into a small red gem.
Rodrigo declares the meal over and announces they will move on to the next game.
Rodrigo snaps his fingers with malice. Amidst a sudden low rumble sounding, followed by a light tremor and heavy crumble, the children panic as debris falls from the ceiling.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp crack sounding, followed by a heavy quake and deep rumble, a giant monster mole bursts through the floor.
Accompanied by a sudden, light flail sounding, followed by a heavy thrash and swift turn, Ephael struggles with his clothes while his friend evaluates the mole.
The monster mole announces that the dead man's flower is beginning to bloom. The black-haired boy expresses confusion.
A sudden, loud scream rings out.
Accompanied by a sudden, light poof sounding, followed by an enthusiastic ta-da, sprouts begin growing out of the terrified children's heads.
Rodrigo smirks and confirms that the seeds have successfully taken root and are growing.
Accompanied by a sudden, light sparkle sounding, the butler joyfully explains that the children will serve as nutrients for the demon realm's favorite flower.
Rodrigo explains that the flower's color is determined by the vessel it grows in.
Accompanied by a sudden, light sparkle sounding, the butler describes the rarity of the dark violet flower.
Rodrigo blushes while hoping to witness the birth of a rare violet bloom today.
Amidst a sudden, light babble sounding followed by a soft ramble, the mole dances while the black-haired boy watches with suspicion.
The black-haired boy warns the others to stay still to slow the flowers buff.
Accompanied by a sudden, light flail sounding followed by a soft flap, the black-haired boy yells at Ephael for his distracting movements.
Ephael admits he swallowed some seeds as a large flower begins to bud from his head.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp yank sounding, the black-haired boy tries to pluck the flower while Ephael cries out in pain.
Rodrigo warns that plucking the flower will cause it to dig immediately into the host's skull.
The two boys freeze in terror.
Rodrigo, seated atop the giant mole, observes the situation and remarks that the dead man's flower is finally blooming, noting there is only one way to end this.
Accompanied by a sudden, firm step sounding, Hestio and Ephael stand their ground as the black-haired boy declares they must defeat both the butler and the monster to escape.
Accompanied by a sudden, wicked grin sounding, the butler mocks their resolve and insults the unsightly color of the flowers parasitic upon them.
Amidst a sudden, rapid dash sounding, Rodrigo vows to finish them quickly while the scene shifts to Islet and the silver-haired boy running through the manor.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp halt sounding, Tessalid stops to catch his breath and checks to see if Islet is doing all right.
Amidst a sudden, heavy pant sounding followed by a deep gasp, the pink-haired girl confirms that she is fine despite the exertion. Accompanied by a sudden, soft shimmer sounding, a vibrant purple flower blooms atop Islet's head as she tells her companion it is time to move.
Accompanied by a sudden, light sparkle sounding, the girl emphasizes the need to find the other stigma bearers immediately.
A sudden, sharp clang sounding echoes as a blood-stained dagger is discarded on the floor. Rodrigo stands with his arms crossed, commending the two boys for holding out so long as a damage dealer and support pair. Amidst a sudden, weary huff sounding, followed by a heavy ha, Ephael and Hestio collapse to their knees in exhaustion.
The butler leans in with a terrifying, toothy smile, noting that stigma bearers are surprisingly weak.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy stomp sounding, Rodrigo commands his mole to kill the remaining children. Amidst another sudden, heavy stomp sounding, Ephael tries to rally his friend, while Hestio admits he actually misses Tessalid in this moment.
While terrified orphans hide beneath the banquet furniture, Ephael shouts in disbelief at Hestio's strange choice for last words.
The black-haired boy looks up with a trace of regret, noting that Tessalid was the strongest among their group. Accompanied by a sudden light whoosh sounding, the mole prepares to strike while Hestio imagines how easily the silver-haired boy would have defeated the creature. Accompanied by a sudden, tight squeeze sounding, the boy envisions Tessalid winning in the most annoying and flashy manner possible. Accompanied by a sudden, massive boom sounding, the floor beneath them erupts in a violent explosion of debris.
Accompanied by a sudden light swoosh sounding, the butler is frozen in shock by an unexpected and powerful intervention.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp slash sounding, Tessalid appears and strikes the giant mole with a powerful blow from his staff.
Accompanied by a sudden, dull thud sounding, the monster collapses while the butler panics over how the silver-haired boy reached them.
Ephael smiles brightly and admits to his friend that his assessment of Tessalid was correct.
The silver-haired boy stands ready for further combat amidst the settling dust. Accompanied by a sudden heavy whoosh sounding, the butler rages at the insolent stigma bearer and threatens to take everything from him. Accompanied by a sudden soft step sounding, Islet enters the chamber and calls out to her friend.
Amidst a sudden light glance sounding followed by a soft cough, sparkle, and shimmer, Rodrigo is momentarily stunned by the girl's presence.
The butler stares in wide-eyed disbelief as he recognizes the rare and precious dark violet flower blooming on Islet.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy badum sounding, Rodrigo's heart races with greed at the sight of the rare bloom.
Amidst a sudden, light slap sounding followed by a quick smack, the butler celebrates his luck and calculates the massive profit he could make from selling the flower.
Rodrigo shifts his tone and politely asks the pink-haired girl for her name, to which she identifies herself as Islet Rodeline.
Accompanied by a sudden light raise sounding, the butler extends an invitation and offers the girl a special proposal.
Accompanied by a sudden, wide grin sounding, Rodrigo invites her to meet Count Orshi and promises her a beautiful dress if she complies.
Hestio warns the girl not to listen to his tricks while Tessalid dismisses the butler's words as pure nonsense. Accompanied by a sudden light instant sounding, Islet surprisingly considers the offer with an optimistic expression.
Accompanied by a sudden light step sounding, the girl ignores Hestio's protests and agrees to go, but only if the butler releases every child in the dungeon.
Accompanied by a sudden light flinch sounding, Rodrigo hesitates at the massive request to free all his prisoners.
Accompanied by a sudden bright beam sounding, Islet's overwhelming positivity forces the butler to accept her terms.
Amidst a sudden, light top sounding followed by a swift whoosh, a delighted Rodrigo begins to lead Eilette away.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp thwack sounding, Tessalid strikes the butler's feet to halt the procession. Accompanied by a sudden, sharp yank sounding, the silver-haired boy pulls Eilette back toward safety. Accompanied by a sudden, heavy step sounding, Tessalid positions himself protectively in front of the girl.
Eilette looks up at her friend with a surprised and admiring expression. Accompanied by a sudden, light sweat sounding, the girl internally grumbles that Tessalid's heroic timing is actually ruining her plan. Accompanied by a sudden, sharp pow sounding, Eilette envisions a scenario where she heroically rescues the orphans before defeating the boss herself. Accompanied by a sudden, light grit sounding, the butler's face turns pale with fury as he calls them arrogant brats. Accompanied by a sudden, massive whoosh sounding, Rodrigo dissolves into a cloud of red mist, vowing to return and kill them once he verifies the flower's value.
Eilette fruitlessly calls for him to wait while a system notification informs her that her easy path to the boss has vanished.
Accompanied by a sudden swift turn sounding, the silver-haired boy demands to know why she would ever try to follow the enemy.
Tessalid snaps at the girl, reminding her that no one asked her to play the hero.
The black-haired boy tells Eilette she isn't a saint while children hide.
Hestio adds that she doesn't have a special role to play. The silver-haired boy insists there is no reason for her to sacrifice herself.
A sudden, light ding sounding signals a system message about an S-class transmigrator.
Eilette realizes her transmigrator benefits exempt the silver-haired boy from divine penalties.
She reflects that he can finally show his true emotions.
Amidst a sudden, soft glum sounding, Eilette feels depressed after being scolded by a child.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp, shocked sounding, Hestio and Ephael marvel at Tessalid's rare candor.
Eilette throws a tantrum and apologizes for her earlier behavior.
The pink-haired girl promises to behave to keep the silver-haired boy calm.
Tessalid softly apologizes for losing his cumber.
Amidst a sudden, loud wail sounding followed by a soft sob and deep weep, orphans cry. Accompanied by a sudden, light nod sounding, the two children agree to regroup and move.
Accompanied by a sudden, rapid rush sounding, Tessalid leads the group through the hallway.
A sudden, bright gleam sounding comes from a mysterious red gem on the floor.
Accompanied by a sudden, light clack sounding, Eilette picks up the sparkling red stone.
Ephael urges the black-haired boy to keep up with Tessalid.
Accompanied by a sudden, light whip sounding, Eilette decides to keep the gem and follows.
Eilette asks if Tez is still mad as they run toward the boss.
Accompanied by a sudden, light flicker sounding, followed by a sharp crackle, a screen appears.
Amidst a sudden, soft visit sounding, followed by a low mumble, mutter, and murmur, Count Orche waits. Accompanied by a sudden, soft mutter sounding, the dungeon master introduces himself.
The black-haired boy is identified as Hestio Liginal.
The blonde-haired boy is identified as Ephael Chalatino.
The pink-haired girl is identified as Eilette Rodeline.
Hestio and Ephael immediately deny being friends with the silver-haired boy. Accompanied by a sudden, sharp clatter sounding, Eilette reveals her alchemy supplies. Accompanied by a sudden, light clink sounding, the boys stare at the potions in awe.
Eilette explains she made the healing potions for the silver-haired boy's companions.
Accompanied by a sudden, quick snatch sounding, followed by a firm grab, the boys claim friendship. Accompanied by a sudden, loud whoa sounding, the group prepares to face the boss.
Ephael grimly notes that they are the only ones left to fight.
Hestio confirms that the other stigma bearers were mentioned by the beller.
Hestio explains that all other stigma bearers in the manor have been killed. Accompanied by a sudden, low, grim sounding, the three boys share a heavy silence.
Amidst a sudden, soft mumble sounding, followed by a light flinch, Eilette mentions the divine advent.
Hestio explains that the religious order is searching for the cause of a powerful advent.
Accompanied by a sudden, soft sounding, Eilette worries about being caught by the order.
Accompanied by a sudden, light ding sounding, followed by a soft swish and energetic flail, Eilette refocuses.
The group resolves to work together to defeat the dungeon boss.
Ephael presents a sandwich as part of his backup plan.
Accompanied by a sudden, light munch sounding, Ephael recalls the butler's promise of freedom. Accompanied by a sudden, sharp squabble sounding, Eilette watches the boys argue. Accompanied by a sudden, sharp slash sounding, Tessalid cleaves through enemies with light. Accompanied by a sudden, light gulp sounding, followed by a soft nom and quick munch. They eat. Accompanied by a sudden, massive wham sounding, a powerful impact shakes the room. Accompanied by a sudden, light gulp sounding, followed by a soft gobble, they consume more supplies.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy foosh sounding, Hestio unleashes his power against monsters. Accompanied by a sudden, light glug sounding, followed by a soft chug, they finish their potions.
Accompanied by a sudden, deep duh sounding, the children stand before the boss's doors. A sudden, heavy dun sounding.
Accompanied by a sudden, light ta-da sounding, Eilette excitedly points out the entrance to the boss's chamber while Hestio expresses confusion.
The pink-haired girl grins and admits she used her system map to find the fastest path through the dungeon.
Hastio grows suspicious of Ayelet's familiarity with the area and her seemingly endless supply of potions.
Accompanied by a sudden, soft step sounding, Ephael halts the group to address Ayelet before they enter.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy dud-dun sounding, the blonde-haired boy requests another bottle of the grape-flavored healing potion.
Amidst a sudden, sharp choral sounding followed by a quick bicker, Ayelet scolds Ephael for his timing while he insists on the potion's flavor.
Accompanied by a sudden, soft step sounding, Ayelet urges them forward and promises a better reward if they survive.
Ethel gazes at his friend with a quiet, determined expression.
Accompanied by a sudden, loud creak sounding, the massive, ornate doors of the final chambers swing open.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy dun sounding, a giant egg-shaped figure waits within the dark room.
Accompanied by a sudden, deep loom sounding, the master of the dungeon welcomes the children and identifies himself as Count Orche.
Ayelet realizes that this massive man is the S-class boss she remembers from her knowledge of the novel.
Amidst a sudden, heavy stomp sounding followed by a sharp crackle and soft vzust, the giant approaches while Ayelet notes he matches the book's description. The pink-haired girl is perplexed to find the boss system window heavily censored and flickering.
Accompanied by a sudden, swift dash sounding, the three boys charge toward the giant boss to start the final battle.
Ayelet yells for the group to wait, warning them that the opponent is far too strong for them to handle alone.
Amidst a sudden, massive boom sounding followed by a sharp crash, the boys engage the boss and perform much better than Ayelet anticipated.
Ayelet watches in shock, wondering if her potions were too powerful or if the S-class boss is unexpectedly weak.
Amidst a sudden, sharp slash sounding followed by a heavy thud, the giant is struck down and collapses onto the floor.
Ephael celebrates their victory while the silver-haired boy remains skeptical and silent amidst the settling dust.
The group stands together in the wreckage, confused as to why the dungeon's exit gate hasn't appeared. The black-haired boy senses something behind him and begins to turn around.
Hastio looks back with wide eyes as a new threat reveals itself. Accompanied by a sudden, heavy shove sounding, Ayelet reacts instantly and pushes Hastio out of the way.
Accompanied by a sudden, massive boom sounding, a violent blast of purple energy strikes the spot where the boy was standing.
Amidst a sudden, sharp crumble sounding, Ayelet explains she knew the enemy would target the support first and reveals the true boss is Rodrigo.
Amidst a sudden, sharp crackle sounding followed by a soft vzist, the censored system window flickers back into view.
Accompanied by a sudden, bright flash sounding, the system reveals the giant was merely a gentleman's substitute for the real master.
Ayelet realizes her reliance on the novel's plot blinded her to the fact that someone else controlled the exit conditions.
The butler reappears in a terrifying demonic form, his white hair wild and his eyes glowing red.
Amidst a sudden, heavy quake sounding followed by a deep rumble, Rodrigo repeats his demand for the girl to follow him.
Accompanied by a sudden, light, shy sounding, the butler acts with mock modesty and offers to make Ayelet his fiancée.
Accompanied by a sudden, light shudder sounding, the pink-haired girl is overcome with physical disgust at the proposal.
A support notification appears with information for those experiencing a crisis.
Accompanied by a sudden, light ding sounding, a system window berates the butler for his predatory and perverted behavior.
Rodrigo ignores the insults and romanticizes the forbidden nature of a demon and a human being together.
Ayelet stands in silent contempt, dismissing the demon's delusions of romance. Accompanied by a sudden, sharp crash sounding, the girl snaps at the butler for the basic failure of proposing without a ring.
Accompanied by a sudden, rapid zoom sounding, a flustered Rodrigo rushes off to search for a piece of jewelry. Amidst a sudden, sharp rummage sounding followed by a light fumble, the boys watch Ayelet's stall tactic in total bewilderment.
Accompanied by a sudden, light clack sounding, the girl pulls out 3 more potions to buy them more time.
Ayelet hands Ephael his favorite grape-flavored brew, hoping to keep his spirits up. The blonde-haired boy stares at the bottle with a heavy art.
Accompanied by a sudden light whip sounding, Ephael accepts the potion and solemnly thanks her for his last supper.
Ephael tells the girl that their physical wounds are not the real problem they face.
Tessalid and Hastio look on, their bodies battered and their energy nearly depleted from the constant fighting.
Accompanied by a sudden light clatter sounding, an empty potion bottle rolls across the floor as the hope for an easy win fades.
Amidst a sudden, sharp shing sounding, Ephael initiates Plan B and declares that Tessalid is the strongest and the only one who truly deserves to survive. The silver-haired boy stares at his friend with an expression of pure horror as he realizes the weight of the coming sacrifice.
Accompanied by a sudden, light ray sounding, the blonde-haired boy apologizes to Ayelet and promises that their pain will be brief.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp jolt sounding, Tessalid awakens in a panic and screams for his friend to stop.
Accompanied by a sudden, massive thud sounding, the silver-haired boy cries out Ephael's name in sheer desperation.
Ayelet reflects on the original tragic sequence of events from the novel she once read. Ayelet recalls that in the original story, Hastio perished in battle, and Ephael was forced to kill all the other children.
The pink-haired girl remembers how Ephel took on the role of a villain to ensure the strongest survivor escaped before taking his own life.
Accompanied by a sudden light grin sounding, Eilette smiles at the blonde-haired boy and tells him to enjoy his nap.
Accompanied by a sudden heavy thud sounding, Ephel collapses into a deep sleep, leaving him confused as he drifts off.
Accompanied by a sudden soft wobble sounding, Tessalid holds the dizzy black-haired boy and tries to understand the sudden turn of events.
Accompanied by a sudden heavy flop sounding, Hestio falls unconscious while Tessalid realizes Eilette gave them sleeping potions.
Accompanied by a sudden rapid sprint sounding, the demon butler returns with a diamond ring for his supposed fiancé.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp turn sounding, Eilette prepares to shift to her foolproof backup plan while Tessalid watches in bewilderment.
Accompanied by a sudden heavy shove sounding, the girl pushes the silver-haired boy into the vanguard of the coming fight.
Tessalid expresses his doubt about their chances of survival with only the two of them left to fight. Eilette begins to gather a massive amount of magical energy.
The pink-haired girl calls upon a divine advent, her eyes blazing with determined power.
Accompanied by a sudden massive whoosh sounding, a powerful shockwave erupts from the center of the ritual. Accompanied by a sudden heavy whoosh sounding, the force of the magic sweeps away the surrounding furniture and debris.
Tessalid is left speechless by the overwhelming intensity of the girl's divine energy. The butler is visibly shaken by the sudden manifestation of such holy power from his intended bride.
Accompanied by a sudden heavy flume sounding, Eilette activates her ultimate siege barrier skill.
Eilette notices her skill levels rising while the other two boys remain safely unconscious in the background.
Amidst a sudden rapid dosh sounding followed by a soft shwoom, the demon butler lunges with his scythe to kill her.
Accompanied by a sudden massive crash sounding, Eilette unleashes a sequence of divine retributions upon her attacker.
Amidst a sudden light grin sounding followed by a sharp clench, the butler recovers and mockingly claims his love is too strong to be stopped.
Accompanied by a sudden rapid dash sounding, Eilette realizes she is in trouble as the demon closes the distance for a physical strike.
Amidst a sudden sharp clang sounding followed by a heavy dun, Tessalid intercepts the scythe with his own blade to protect the girl.
The silver-haired boy stares down the demon and declares he will not let the enemy lay a hand on her.
Eilette is relieved to have a protector and commands her system to search for a buffing skill.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp grit sounding, the butler growls in frustration at the silver-haired boy's interference.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy womb sounding, a dark explosion erupts as the boss demands the boy get out of his way.
Amidst a sudden, soft falter sounding followed by a light skid, Tessalid struggles to stay upright against the dark pressure.
Eilette watches from behind the boy, waiting for the perfect opening. Tessalid unleashes his divine hymn skill, bathing himself in a brilliant golden light.
Eilette is impressed by the raw power of the boy's ability compared to the others.
Amidst a sudden, sharp clang sounding followed by a light clank, the two warriors exchange a flurry of high-speed blows.
Amidst a sudden, sharp clang sounding followed by a heavy clash, Tessalid's holy sword clashes violently with the demon's weapon.
The demon butler is stunned by the boy's unexpected resilience and strength.
The boss is bewildered by the source and nature of the boy's newfound power. Eilette smiles confidently and announces that her preparations for the final phase are complete. Accompanied by a sudden, massive wham sounding, the butler strikes out with a powerful, sweeping attack. Accompanied by a sudden, heavy shwoom sounding, the boss identifies himself as Count Orsh and refuses to be defeated.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy whoosh sounding, glowing blue thorny vines suddenly erupt and bind the demon's body.
Amidst a sudden, sharp crack sounding followed by a light kirk, Eilette exerts her omnipotence to restrain the master of the dungeon.
Eilette prepares to cast a final purifying spot.
The pink-haired girl raises her finger to the sky as a beacon of light forms. Accompanied by a sudden, bright flash sounding, a pillar of holy light strikes down through the demon's head. Accompanied by a sudden, heavy whoosh sounding, a massive explosion of golden energy consumes the boss.
Tessalid watches in shock as the demon lets out a final, pained scream. The butler's body begins to disintegrate into light as he realizes he has been truly vanquished.
Count Orsh shrieks in agony as a pillar of holy light consumes him.
Accompanied by a sudden, massive boom sounding, the demonic butler is completely destroyed.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy whoosh sounding, the intense energy from the explosion clears the room. Accompanied by a sudden, light whoosh sounding, the white-haired boy stands alone amidst the falling feathers.
His attention is caught by a sudden, steady step sounding echoing through the wreckage. He realizes the white-haired girl is the holy figure the religious order has been searching for. Delicate white feathers drift slowly through the quiet air in the battle's aftermath. The boy directly identifies the girl as the saint.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp crack sounding, Eilette praises his performance while noting the immense power of the enemy. Accompanied by a sudden, rapid dash sounding, she rushes toward a pile of glowing dropped items.
She joyfully presents 2 ornate skill books she found as loot from the boss. The boy watches her with a look of stunned, wide-eyed silence. Amidst a sudden, light nod sounding, Eilette credits her god for allowing her to manifest such power.
Tessalid expresses his surprise at her words and mentions he has a favor to ask. She requests that he keep her identity and abilities a secret because she isn't ready to join an order.
The boy stares back at her in deep, silent contemplation.
Eilette worries that his strong sense of mission will make him refuse her request.
She is genuinely shocked when he unexpectedly agrees to keep her secret. Eilette looks up at him with wide, surprised eyes.
Tessalid explains that her personal happiness matters more than her status or the order.
He feels slightly awkward and wonders if his response was taken as a compliment. The boy opens the first skill book to reveal pages filled with ancient, glowing runes. Accompanied by a sudden, light swoosh sounding, the knowledge from the book begins to transfer to him. A swirling aura of blue energy surrounds the boy as he successfully learns the new skill.
Eilette asks him about the specific nature of the ability he gained.
He reveals that his new skill is dedicated to defending his partner.
The boy is pleased to explain that he can now share half of her physical pain.
Eilette is annoyed and argues that he shouldn't be happy about a skill that causes him harm.
Amidst a sudden, light peak sounding, she turns her attention to her own reward.
The pages of her skill book radiate a brilliant, sparkling light as she opens them.
She discovers her healing abilities are 5 times more effective when used specifically on Tessalide.
Accompanied by a sudden light flash sounding, a more detailed description of the skill appears.
The system reveals the skill was intended for the Count's fiancé and has unconventional stamina benefits.
Accompanied by a sudden sharp swipe sounding, Eilette closes the window in a red-faced huff of embarrassment. Accompanied by a sudden light sway sounding, she begins to stumble and curses the dead Count for being annoying.
Amidst a sudden light wobble sounding, the girl realizes her transformation time is finally running out.
She tells the boy she has one more favor to ask of him.
Tessalid leans in close and asks what else she needs. Eilette grips his white tunic firmly as her remaining strength begins to fade.
Accompanied by a sudden light smile sounding, she expresses her happiness at meeting him and hopes for another encounter. The pink-haired Eilette smiles radiantly as she finally loses consciousness.
Tessalid desperately calls out her name as his own vision begins to grow hazy.
A system notification informs Eilette she is afflicted with holy fever for overextending her level.
The window suggests a long period of sleep is necessary for her to recover.
Time passes as the scene shifts to a serene, starry night sky.
A decorative border indicates that 2 hours have elapsed since the end of the battle.
Narration explains that the dungeon incident ended with 0 casualties thanks to the plushie debuff.
The children are safely returned to their families after being treated for their minor injuries.
Tessalid testifies to the authorities that the boss was dead by the time he woke up.
The investigation concludes that a mysterious hero performed the divine advent and left before being identified.
The pink-haired girl lies in bed, struggling to breathe as a heavy sweat breaks across her face.
Her attention is drawn to a sudden, light touch, sounding as a cool hand rests upon her fevered forehead.
A voice expresses concern that her high temperature shows no signs of dropping.
The observer wonders if her current suffering is the inevitable cost of wielding such immense power.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp grit sounding, the silver-haired boy clenches his jaw in frustration at the cruel nature of divine order.
Amidst a sudden, rapid dash sounding, a robed man arrives and urgently summons the boy to help with the shortage of hands outside.
Tessalid looks down with a somber expression and quietly agrees to leave the bedside. Accompanied by a sudden, heavy step sounding, the boy walks away while the pink-haired girl remains deep in her unconscious slumber.
A memory of her radiant, joyful smile lingers in the air, echoing her promise to meet him again.
The scene pulls back to show the girl resting peacefully in a grand draped bed.
Amidst a sudden, light foosh sounding, her long pink hair fans out across the pillow as she shifts in her sleep. A golden cross necklace begins to glitter and sparkle brightly against her green dress. A blonde woman watches her with a look of mild amusement, questioning how she can sleep so soundly after waking her up.
Accompanied by a sudden, quick poke sounding, followed by a light jab and prod, the woman teases her about her fever being a result of poor habits.
The blonde woman smiles warmly, her eyes full of affection for the sleeping girl. Amidst a sudden, sharp rattle sounding, followed by a light clatter, 2 nearby skeletons shake in a comical display of excitement.
Accompanied by a sudden, light spring sounding, a small fire demon leaps up and screams about its love for farming and grass.
A younger version of Eilette watches the dancing skeletons and warns her fire demon not to burn anything.
A dark-haired girl expresses her disbelief that the adorable creature is actually a demon, while Eilette explains its practical uses for their farm.
Eilette laughs and recounts the surprise of finding a demon disguised as a rock while her friend asks for reassurance.
Eilette explains that the corrupt demon is harmless because it prefers eating grass over killing.
Bia looks at her friend with a stern expression and points out that Eilette is the one who returned with a dangerous fever.
The dark-haired girl admits she would have forbidden the trip if she had known the risks involved.
Islet hugs her worried friend and insists that saving the other children made the danger worthwhile. As she holds her friend, Islet reflects on how she successfully prevented the tragic events of the original story. She observes the silver-haired boy in the distance, noting how his path has already begun to diverge from his original fate.
The girl wonders if changing the protagonist's origin story was truly the right choice.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp stab sounding, a system notification reprimands her for her interference.
A sudden, sharp ding sounding echoes as one system voice complains about her changes, while another defends her status as a high-class transmigrator. Amidst a sudden, light ding sounding, the two divine entities continue their silent, bickering exchange.
Islet tries to quiet the bickering voices while her friend Bia watches her with a confused expression.
She tells her friend she needs to step away to pray, masking her internal conversation with the systems.
Bia is deeply moved, believing her friend is a truly devout and saintly apostle.
Standing alone in the field, Islet considers her place in this 17th loop of the timeline.
She notes that her arrival occurred during the tutorial period, well before the protagonist's cycle of regression was supposed to start.
The girl questions if her actions now will have a lasting impact on the rest of the novel's plot.
Accompanied by a sudden light ding sounding, a message confirms that her changes will indeed reshape the entire world.
The divine voice explains that the protagonist's friends will now survive every return, and the skills she shared will remain permanent.
Islet is struck by a sudden realization and asks what will happen to her own existence in this new reality.
The scene shifts to the silver-haired boy staring out a window into the bright blue sky.
His hand reaches toward a pink macaron, a small reminder of the girl he once knew.
Islet looks away with a pensive expression, feeling the weight of her unique situation.
Accompanied by a sudden light plop sounding, she sits against a tree and feels a mix of pride and sadness for the boy's improved childhood.
She recalls her own smile and the hope she tried to instill in those around her. The girl realizes the boy will likely be the only person in the world who retains any memory of her.
She imagines the boy desperately asking others about her, only to be told that no such person exists.
Accompanied by a sudden heavy wail sounding, she pictures him crying and insisting that their promise was real.
Islet feels a pang of guilt, hoping that being gaslighted by his entire world won't drive him to madness.
The system voice scolds her for her reckless behavior while the girl lets out a tired sigh of resignation.
The two divine entities continue their argument about her education as she rests quietly beneath the shade of a tree. The system voice declares that there is no purpose in creating a multi-dimensional world if everyone merely follows the original novel's plot.
Islet stares in awe at the glowing system window.
The pink-haired girl enthusiastically praises the voice for being incredibly logical and wise.
She expresses her deep admiration, noting that the entity's grand name is perfectly suited to its role.
Amidst a sudden light clench sounding, Islet clenches her fist with a determined look, resolving to change the world to ensure her own survival.
The scene focuses on the girl's small boots as she stands firmly on the vibrant green grass.
Surrounded by floating gold coins, Islet decides to spend her resources on a specific item she has been delaying. Accompanied by a sudden light grab sounding, the girl reaches down and picks up a sturdy wooden stick from the ground. A system notification announces that she has successfully unlocked the strong body skill through her dedicated physical training. Islet realizes that awakening her aura will require mastering a weapon and tempering her body, though she expects the process to be difficult.
Accompanied by a sudden light grin sounding, the determined girl swings her stick, confident that her transmigrator perks will speed up her mastery.
Accompanied by a sudden light whoosh sounding followed by a quick wish, Islet practices her swings against the clear blue sky with a series of spirited shouts.
The dark-haired Bia watches her friend from behind a tree, suggesting that it is time for them to head back.
Amidst a sudden light wobble sounding, Islet suddenly collapses into a trembling pink blob, prompting a shocked cry from Bia.
The pink-haired girl looks completely exhausted and dazed, struggling to understand her sudden loss of form.
A system notification frantically questions why her proficiency level has stopped increasing despite her efforts.
The scene shifts to the grand architecture of a manor, showcasing towering marble pillars under a bright sun. Sunlight glints off the ornate iron fence and white stone columns of the estate grounds.
Islet sits alone on the wide stone steps of the manor, clutching her training stick with a pensive expression.
A system message explains that aura awakening requires specific techniques and meditation that are nearly impossible to master without professional guidance.
The girl wonders if the item shop offers any beginner training videos, picturing a muscular instructor leading a workout session. Islet rests her chin on her hands and looks upward, startled by an unexpected presence.
The pink-haired girl remains seated in a daze, processing her current training predicament.
She turns her head to the side, her attention captured by a strange sensation coming from nearby. Accompanied by a sudden light glow sounding, Islet's cross necklace begins to sparkle as a mysterious voice tells her to look down.
Eilette looks up at a blonde woman whose long, wavy hair is adorned with a silver star clip.
The woman smiles down at her, her violet eyes shining with a mysterious, otherworldly light.
The pink-haired girl stares in shock, her eyes wide as she realizes she is seeing a spirit.
Eilette lets out a silent, internal scream of terror at the realization that she is facing a ghost.
The translucent blonde woman stands gracefully, her spirit form shimmering with golden sparkles.
Eilette cowers on the steps, her face pale with fear as she stares at the apparition.
Accompanied by a sudden light smile sounding, the beautiful ghost continues to gaze at the girl with a gentle, knowing expression.
Finding her voice, Eilette asks if the spirit is a friend of Cardinal Cartalaya.
The woman asks if her old friend is still in good health, and Eilette confirms that the cardinal is well.
The blonde spirit offers to serve as an instructor, suggesting that she can help the girl with her training.
Eilette looks skeptical until the spirit mentions that while others honored her as a saint, she had a different true profession.
Accompanied by a sudden light da-dun sounding, the spirit puts on dark sunglasses and reveals she was the most feared drill instructor in the Vatican.
Accompanied by a sudden light fwhip sounding, the woman barks an order at recruit Eilette, leaving the girl looking small and intimidated.
Eilette remains frozen in shock, her brain struggling to process the sudden change in the spirit's demeanor.
The girl looks completely baffled, unable to reconcile the beautiful saint with a harsh military instructor.
Accompanied by a sudden light dun sounding repeated for dramatic effect, the scene reveals an array of training dummies and practice swords. Amidst a sudden light dun sounding, Eilette stands in the center of the training grounds, surprised to find such a place within the manor.
Amidst a sudden light turn sounding, the instructor critiques the poorly managed state of the equipment while Eilette looks around in wonder.
A close-up reveals the spiderwebs covering the rotting wooden beams, but the girl's attempt to delay training with stretches is quickly dismissed.
Accompanied by a sudden light shove sounding followed by a sharp yank, the instructor forces Eilette into action and orders her to run 20 laps.
Accompanied by a sudden light dash sounding followed by a quick scurry and a heavy thud, the instructor yells at Eilette to move faster while the girl struggles through the workout. Accompanied by a sudden light caw sounding followed by a sharp squawk, blackbirds fly across the orange glow of the sunset sky.
Amidst a sudden light caw sounding followed by a sharp squawk, Eilette lies face down in the dirt, her clothes covered in grime from the intense training.
Accompanied by a sudden light fsh sounding, the instructor begins to fade away, telling the exhausted girl that they will resume the lessons tomorrow.
Accompanied by a sudden light turn sounding, Eilette rolls onto her side and laments that she cannot get a refund for her Aura training package. Exhausted and mud-stained, Eilette calls out for help while a crow caws in the sunset air.
System notifications mock her low stamina as the girl lies face down, hurt by the god's mean comments.
The voice that shapes the world silences the other entities and expresses deep sympathy for the girl's state.
Shivering as the sun sets, Eilette tearfully thanks the kind divine entity for its rare kindness.
A system message notes the voice that shapes the world's concern and its uncertainty on how to help.
Accompanied by a sudden light foosh sounding, a divine ginseng extract gift box appears amidst falling gold coins.
Eilette looks at the gift in shock while the other gods react with disbelief at the lavish offering.
A system window describes the extract as a powerful stamina booster that allows a week's worth of training.
Holding the box, Eilette listens as the gods complain about the high cost of the gift.
Accompanied by a sudden light rip sounding, the girl tears open a packet of the concentrated medicine.
Accompanied by a sudden deep gulp sounding, she drinks the extract to fuel her training. Accompanied by a sudden heavy thump sounding, the girl's eyes widen as a surge of energy hits her.
She feels a rush of power, granting her unlimited stamina and explosive muscle regeneration.
A flurry of buffs fills the screen, promising physical recovery and the strength of a god's love.
Her body feels incredibly light.
Eilette calls for drill instructor Agnes while her golden cross necklace catches the leg.
Accompanied by a sudden light vroom sounding, the necklace begins to glow with shimmering golden power.
Lifting her sunglasses, the blonde spirit asks the girl if she was called for a new lesson. Covered in dirt but brimming with energy, Eilette declares her determination to train even more. Agnes is astonished, noting that the girl was on the brink of death just moments ago.
The pink-haired girl asserts her resilience, clenching her fists with a wide, confident smile. She reflects on the expensive gift and resolves to spend every second of the next 2 hours training.
Accompanied by a sudden light dash sounding, Eilette sprints off to start 20 more laps as ordered. She leaps and jumps with boundless energy, while system notifications track her rapid experience gains.
Accompanied by a sudden light zoom sounding, the girl races across the training grounds with pure joy.
She scurries over the obstacles with renewed vigor, while the spirit instructor watches her progress from afar.
Accompanied by a sudden light fwhip sounding, Agnes adjusts her glasses and marvels at the girl's frightening growth.
Eilette swings across the bars with a shout, prompting Agnes to realize she is witnessing a legend born. The blonde spirit grins with pride as she watches the girl's intense drive and enjoyment of training. Accompanied by a sudden heavy step sounding, a sturdy boot plants itself firmly on the dirt.
Ailet emerges from the dust clouds with a focused, shadowy expression.
Accompanied by a sudden light to done sounding, a notification confirms her strong body skill has reached level 17.
Agnes flinches in surprise at the girl's intense presence and suggests they move to the next lesson.
The instructor turns away gracefully, ready to introduce the next phase of martial mastery. Accompanied by a sudden sharp clatter sounding, a wide assortment of practice weapons is revealed on the ground. Agnes asks her recruit if she knows the other name used for those who master aura. Accompanied by a sudden soft fsh sounding, Agnes summons a golden sword and explains the pinnacle of swordsmanship. The spirit stands with the glowing blade, detailing the status and power of true swordmasters. Accompanied by a sudden soft fsh sounding, followed by a quick shwoom and a light fwish, she poses elegantly. Accompanied by a sudden light whoosh sounding, she explains how strength scales with one's skill level.
Agnes focuses her gaze, describing how mastered weapons can become tougher than the strongest divine metals.
Ailet watches in awe as Agnes creates 7 spectral glowing swords in a circle behind her.
Bouncing with excitement, the girl wonders if she can achieve such an incredible level of power.
A message emphasizes that she must now select a specific weapon to master.
Looking like an instructor from hell, Agnes warns that the path to mastery involves endless humiliation.
Accompanied by a sudden deep gulp sounding, Ailet tenses her muscles and prepares for the challenge.
The girl grins to herself, noting how lucky the instructor is to have such a talented student.
She draws a practice sword, confident in her transmigrator perks and the blessing of extreme growth.
Agnes orders her to follow the correct form as they begin their first sword drill.
Ailet rapidly masters the sword and spear, reaching level 3 in both while Agnes looks on in shock. Ailet achieves bow mastery level 2 while Agnes dismisses her efforts as beginner luck.
The instructor stands completely dumbfounded by the girl's rapid progress.
Ailet reaches whip mastery level 2 as Agnes promises to make the next lesson truly grueling. Accompanied by a sudden light gasp sounding, Agnes is visibly shaken by the girl's unnerving, dark determination. Accompanied by a sudden light clack sounding, Agnes adjusts her sunglasses and invites her recruit to select her primary and secondary weapons. Accompanied by a sudden light whip sounding, Ailet firmly grips both a practice sword and a whip.
Agnes looks on in astonishment at the girl's unconventional choice.
Ailet stands with unwavering resolve, ready to master the difficult combination. Ailet reflects on the research she conducted regarding her formidable drill instructor. The narration reveals that Agnes Oslet was a celebrated saint and a hero of the continent.
She was a renowned master who famously halted a massive dungeon outbreak at the front lines. Having mastered every weapon in her teens, Agnes developed a unique and legendary style involving the whip sword.
The spirit instructor maintains a stern, majestic expression.
Ailet's focused green eyes meet Agnes's gaze as the instructor asks if she truly wants to learn such a difficult technique. Ailet shouts her enthusiastic commitment to learning the whip sword from her mentor. A faint, satisfied smile touches the instructor's lips. Agnes warns that training will now become brutal, while Ailet accepts the challenge with a spirited cry.
Accompanied by a sudden, deep snore sounding, Ailet falls into a deep sleep while clutching a sheet of paper.
Accompanied by a sudden light eek sounding, the girl jolts awake when her friend Bianca calls her name. Accompanied by a sudden soft rub sounding, Ailet wipes her eyes and laments her exhausting schedule of training and chores. Bianca acknowledges the heavy burden of Ailet's Eris lessons and constant testing. A flashback shows Ailet successfully organizing merchants to sell her father's Rodaline potions with Bianca's help.
Leaning on her friend, Ailet expresses her nervousness about whether the new potions will actually sell. Bianca reassures the girl that the quality of the Rodaline family's alchemical products is top tier. Ailet cheers with renewed excitement, dreaming of making a fortune from the potion sales. She envisions using the money to purchase a special item that will let her escape the difficult survival story genre.
A system window displays the genre change voucher, an incredibly expensive item priced at 10 billion cash. Accompanied by a sudden light mumble sounding, Ailet suggests using social media influencers for promotion, leaving Bianca totally confused.
The scene shifts to a tall, tiled tower under a bright, cloud-filled sky.
Life continues in the bustling town where bundles of red peppers hang from the wooden rafters. Accompanied by a sudden light clink sounding, a hand reaches out to inspect a bottle of orange potion at a market stall. A local miner looks intrigued by the unfamiliar alchemical products on display.
Accompanied by a sudden light dosh sounding, an elderly man runs through the street shouting that Fenrir has arrived in town. Accompanied by a sudden heavy step sounding, a massive muscular man walks through the village.
Accompanied by a sudden light ca sounding, a group of men stares in awe at the newcomer's impressive physique and muscle supplement.
Accompanied by a sudden deep bulge sounding, the man's chest muscles flex as he notes their excellent condition.
Fenrir, a hulking man with a blonde beard, stands confidently amidst falling flower petals.
The story moves to the entrance of the contaminated crystal cave, a dangerous C-class dungeon.
Accompanied by a sudden heavy wham sounding followed by a sharp whack, miners labor away in the dark torchlit tunnels.
Accompanied by a sudden heavy thud sounding, workers push wooden carts through the rocky cavern.
Accompanied by a sudden sharp crack sounding, a pickaxe strikes deep into the stone. Accompanied by a sudden heavy crumble sounding, a wall of rock collapses as Fenrir watches the progress.
Accompanied by a sudden light flex sounding, Fenrir admires how happy his pectoral muscles feel today.
Accompanied by a sudden soft stretch sounding, he decides to placate his supposedly upset deltoids and lats.
Accompanied by a sudden light whoa sounding, the other miners gaze in worship at Fenrir's perfect triangle-shaped torso. Checking a small hourglass, the large man realizes it is time for his scheduled muscle supplement.
Accompanied by a sudden light clink sounding, Fenrir reaches into his pouch to retrieve a set of test tubes.
Accompanied by a sudden deep gulp sounding, he tilts his head back to consume the contents of a vial.
Accompanied by a sudden muffled sounding, he grimaces at the truly horrific taste of the potion. Fenrir stares at the empty tube, vowing to endure the bitter, paralyzing taste for the sake of his gains.
Accompanied by a sudden light ray sounding, Fenrir prepares to return to his labor.
Accompanied by a sudden sharp swing sounding, he brings his heavy tool down.
Accompanied by a sudden heavy wham sounding, the rock wall shatters completely. Accompanied by a sudden sharp thwack sounding followed by a light clang, two miners marvel at Fenrir's immense strength. Accompanied by a sudden sharp whack sounding, the younger miner admits he is only there for quick cash.
Accompanied by a sudden heavy bam sounding, followed by a light clang, the worker explains how Fenrir arrived suddenly.
Accompanied by a sudden heavy crash sounding followed by a sharp thwack, the men complain about the terrifying noise.
Accompanied by a sudden light squirm sounding, followed by a sharp crack, the miners doubt any monsters remain.
Accompanied by a sudden sharp crack sounding followed by a heavy boom, a massive monster bursts through. Accompanied by a sudden heavy wham sounding, the giant creature slams against the cavern floor.
Accompanied by a sudden light stir sounding, the workers panic as they realize the newcomer is trapped.
Fenrir tells the fallen worker not to worry about the danger.
Accompanied by a sudden light to done sounding, Fenrir protectively scoops the young man into his arms.
Accompanied by a sudden light grin sounding, the young man looks up in total admiration.
Accompanied by a sudden heavy slam sounding, followed by a sharp crash, the monster lunges again.
Fenrir identifies the acid worm and notes the miners cannot survive it alone.
Accompanied by a sudden light release sounding, he orders the young man to find safety.
Accompanied by a sudden heavy step sounding, the giant man walks toward the beast.
Accompanied by a sudden sharp clench sounding, his powerful fist glows with golden energy.
Accompanied by a sudden heavy gape sounding, the monster prepares to devour another worker.
Accompanied by a sudden light whoosh sounding, a powerful shockwave ripples through the air.
Fenrir leaps high into the air with incredible power.
Dust and debris swirl around the champion's massive frame.
Accompanied by a sudden heavy wham sounding, he delivers a devastating physical blow.
Accompanied by a sudden light spurt sounding, the creature screeches as it takes damage.
Accompanied by a sudden sharp snap sounding followed by a crack, he grips the beast's maw.
Accompanied by a sudden light kirk sounding, the muscular man exerts a terrifying force.
Accompanied by a sudden light flash sounding, Fenrir's eyes glow with intense battle focus.
Accompanied by a sudden heavy rip sounding, he physically tears the monster in two.
Accompanied by a sudden light spurt sounding followed by a soft splatter, monster blood hits the floor.
Accompanied by a sudden light cheer sounding followed by a heavy hurrah, the miners celebrate his victory. The workers lead 3 cheers for his incredible muscles.
Accompanied by a sudden soft drip sounding, they chant praises for his pectoral gains.
Accompanied by a sudden sharp clatter sounding, Fenrir discovers his supplement potions are shattered.
Accompanied by a sudden light step sounding, he despairs over imminent muscle loss.
Accompanied by a sudden light bow sounding, the young miner offers a gift of thanks.
The young man insists he take it because muscle loss is unacceptable.
Accompanied by a sudden light clack sounding, Fenrir accepts the potion with genuine gratitude. Accompanied by a sudden light clink sounding, he inspects the unfamiliar alchemist Rodel label. Accompanied by a sudden light gulp sounding, he drinks the contents in one go.
Accompanied by a sudden light flash sounding, he is stunned by the incredible flavor. He envisions a magnificent, greasy feast of meat and burgers.
Accompanied by a sudden light rays sounding, he declares the alchemist is an absolute genius.
Accompanied by a sudden light murmur sounding, followed by a soft clamor and a light stir, rumors spread.
The scene shifts to the bright facade of the Rhodoline estate.
A frantic merchant reports that their entire stock has sold out.
Mr. Rhodoline is shocked by the sudden, overwhelming demand for restocks. Eilette realizes their alchemical business has finally hit the big time.
Accompanied by a sudden light blabber sounding, Eilette argues with unseen voices about her ideal genre.
Accompanied by a sudden light ding sounding, followed by a sharp crack, a system warning appears.
The brown-haired father promises Allie anything once the next batch of potions is finished.
Allie looks down, whispering that it is far too late for that. Watching the brown-haired man's joy, the pink-haired girl decides her father's happiness is reward enough.
Bolstered by their success, the family enthusiastically commits to a grueling production schedule. Rows of shimmering orange potion bottles.
Accompanied by a sudden heavy woo sounding, the trio takes a well-earned break after their labor. The pink-haired girl reflects on the past few days spent as a dedicated team of alchemists. Looking at their inventory, Prince excitedly predicts they will soon be incredibly wealthy. The pink-haired boy asks Allie what she plans to do with her share of the fortune. Allie explains her plan to fund his education at a night academy.
Deeply moved by her kindness, Prince vows to spend his earnings on her as well.
Accompanied by a sudden, soft hug sounding, the brown-haired father pulls both children into a warm embrace. The father expresses his wish to return to the home they once shared with their mother. Narration explains that while Allie's mother died early in the original plot, her current circumstances differ.
Mr. Rhodoline describes their mother as an unpredictable woman who frequently came and went.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp whip sounding, Prince silences Allie while asking his father how the couple met. Smiling warmly, the brown-haired man prepares to recount the story of their first encounter.
A flashback reveals a younger Mr. Rhodoline discovering an injured woman deep within the forest.
He brought her home to heal, and despite her amnesia, a romance blossomed between them.
Allie listens skeptically to tales of her mother bringing home wild boars for her father to dress.
Her father notes the woman's sudden disappearance years ago, suggesting she belonged to another world.
Allie asks if he harbors any resentment toward her mother for leaving them hide.
Accompanied by a sudden light kiss sounding, he expresses his deep gratitude for the children she gave him. The father maintains his belief that their mother never intended to desert her family. Prince suddenly reveals he witnessed his mother on the very night she vanished. In a memory, the pink-haired woman arms herself with farming tools to deal with intruders.
She tells the young boy she is going to round up some escaped livestock and return.
Allie and her father stare blankly as they process this revelation about the mother's character. Accompanied by a sudden light spring sounding, Allie realizes her mother was likely a powerful fighter.
Mr. Rhodoline frets that she may have encountered serious trouble while hunting dangerous game.
Allie observes her father's lingering devotion to the woman who left. The girl wonders about the nature of such a deep and lasting love.
A happy memory of family life.
Accompanied by a sudden soft droop sounding, Allie laments her inability to leave the estate grounds. Accompanied by a sudden sharp gasp sounding, a system window appears with a critic's complaint. Accompanied by a sudden light spring sounding, Allie correctly deduces their former home's location. Accompanied by a sudden light dash sounding, the pink-haired girl runs off to prepare for travel.
Allie returns with a basket of herbs, determined to fund their journey to the duchy.
Prince volunteers to help with the work so they can visit the old house together. The father looks completely stunned. Accompanied by a sudden light glisten sounding, tears of joy well up in the father's eyes. He agrees to the first family vacation, though Allie teases him about his ulterior motives. Accompanied by a sudden heavy step sounding, a broad-shouldered man walks through a palace hallway. Accompanied by a sudden soft step sounding, a gray-haired aide bows respectfully to his master. Accompanied by a sudden deep dun sounding, Grand Duke Aaron Jake Heathfenrir makes his appearance. The muscular duke complains about his missed workout while asking for an update on urgent matters. The aide reports that they have made a significant discovery.
The news that a trace of his daughter has been found leaves the Duke speechless.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp jolt sounding, the Duke reacts with intense shock to the location. Accompanied by a sudden light whip sounding, the aide presents a document detailing her proximity. Accompanied by a sudden light tap sounding, the gray-haired aide points to the specific location where traces of her sword were discovered.
Tears of hope well up in the blonde Duke's eyes as he whispers Althea's name, wondering if their reunion is finally at hand.
The gray-haired aide watches his master's emotional display with a look of deep concern.
Narration explains how the Duke turned to bodybuilding to cope with the deep dejection of his daughter cutting all ties.
Accompanied by a sudden light turn sounding, the muscular Duke flexes his massive arms while his aide observes his excessive dedication to fitness. Accompanied by a sudden soft rustle sounding, the Duke's gloved hand grips the map as he speaks his daughter's name. Clenching the document tightly, the blonde Duke makes a solemn vow to find his lost child. Ali and Prinz excitedly lead the way through the city streets while their father follows closely behind. His promise to find her echoes over a backdrop of blossoming pink flowers.
A magnificent, multi-layered strawberry parfait is presented with a flourish. The pink-haired siblings stare at the towering dessert with wide eyes and open mouths. Mr. Rodeline describes the parfait as a beautiful work of art, while Ali focuses on the quality of the strawberries. While eating, the father reminisces about dating their mother at this very spot before overhearing a nearby conversation about the magic tower. Two scholars in green robes discuss Hakim Sarmatan's status as a leading authority on recovery potions who receives massive research funding. Mr. Rodeline looks down sadly as the men mock the professor's lack of recent progress. Ali watches with a serious expression as her father's fist trembles in silent reaction to the insults. The pink-haired girl's green eyes narrow with a cold and determined focus. The grand spires of the ivory tower.
Ali recalls how the villainous Hakim Sarmatan stole her father's research and framed him to have him expelled from the tower.
Ali reminds herself that her father is the true inventor of the potion while Prinz checks on his shaken parent.
Mr. Rodeline insists he is fine and tries to distract the children by mentioning their mother's intense dislike for the very dessert they are eating. Ali listens with growing curiosity to the unusual stories about her mother.
The brown-haired father laughs as he recounts how their mother used to force-feed him the entire dessert despite her own distaste for it.
Ali reflects on the remarkable and slightly terrifying power of her parents' love.
The father becomes flustered and ends the story abruptly, promising to tell them the rest of the romantic details once they turn 15.
Prinz expresses his excitement about visiting their old hut, prompting a surprised response from his father. Accompanied by a sudden, heavy dun-dun sounding, the family arrives at the small, overgrown house they once called home.
The trio stands before the abandoned structure as crows circle in the twilight sky.
Ali notes the dilapidated furniture and abandoned state of the hut, comparing the messy interior to a haunted house. Accompanied by a sudden, light jolt sounding, the kids energetically volunteer to clean the small house while Ali finds a towel to start wiping.
Mr. Rodeline looks on in disbelief as his children sprint inside to begin the chores.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy thud sounding, the cleaning equipment is dropped into place.
The children work with superhuman speed and stamina, a direct result of Ali purchasing a special aura package for the family. Accompanied by a sudden light clack sounding, Ali runs out of the house and tells her father to take a break while they finish.
Accompanied by a sudden light top sounding, Ali explores the surrounding woods, feeling as though she hasn't seen everything yet.
The pink-haired girl glances back as she wonders why the quest hasn't been completed yet.
A system window appears, assigning her a D-rank quest to explore the hometown where her family lived happily.
Ali decides to check her system map to see if there are any hidden locations she overlooked.
A look of realization crosses her face as she notices a strange anomaly on the digital map. She focuses on a large, empty area on the map that seems to be hiding something.
Ali realizes the vacant plot of land is far too out of place to be a natural occurrence.
The girl asks the world's governing voice if the mysterious empty area is the key to her quest. Ali peers through the dense foliage as she finally understands the secret of the terrain.
Ali dashes through the forest, determined to follow the path indicated by the system.
Accompanied by a sudden, light whoosh sounding, she emerges from the bushes and discovers a shimmering, moonlit body of water.
Ali realizes that what looks like a lake is actually a massive crater filled with glowing water.
Deep bubbles rise from the crater floor.
Accompanied by a sudden light splash sounding, the pink-haired girl hitches up her dress and steps into the water to investigate.
Accompanied by a sudden light shwoom sounding, a dark and swirling dungeon entrance is revealed beneath the surface.
Accompanied by a sudden light foosh sounding, Ali prepares herself to enter the hidden dungeon. The shimmering blonde-haired woman notes that someone must have reacted quickly to the disaster to save the nearby villages.
Sweating nervously, the pink-haired girl mentions the terrifying concept of a dungeon burst.
Explanatory text describes a dungeon burst as an explosive monster spill that turns even low-class dungeons into S-class catastrophes.
The golden-haired woman observes that this dungeon remains strangely untouched despite the lack of any memorials for casualties.
Staring into the glowing water, the pink-haired girl realizes that the entire expedition team likely perished while stopping the burst.
Narration confirms that the lack of survivors is why the events of that night remain a complete mystery.
Ali hesitates to enter the dangerous area while two system voices argue over whether the location is safe for her to explore.
The girl's eyes light up with excitement as she considers the possibility of finding S-class loot from a defeated boss.
A system notification appears, informing Eilette that there is a specific favor requested of her. Clutching her hands to her chest, the blonde woman expresses her deep empathy for the martyrs who sacrificed themselves. The pink-haired girl realizes that Agnes herself falls into the category of those who gave everything to stop a dungeon burst.
Accompanied by a sudden light splash sounding, the golden-haired woman looks back as Ali steps into the shimmering lake.
Wading through the water, the girl explains her desire to pay her respects to those who died at this site.
Deeply moved by the child's kindness, the blonde woman thanks Eilette with a warm and grateful expression. Accompanied by a sudden, light splish and splosh sounding, narration notes that while Allie can be greedy, she possesses a heart of gold. The two companions stand before a swirling purple vortex located at the bottom of the crater. Accompanied by a sudden, light leap sounding, Allie jumps into the portal while shouting about her excitement for free items. Accompanied by a sudden, light swoosh sounding, the girl vanishes into the dark energy as the blonde woman watches in disbelief.
Agnes reacts with comical shock to Allie's blatant focus on material gain over her earlier sentiment.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp slash sounding, a blade cuts through the air with intense power.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy thud sounding, Allie lands firmly on the ground with her sword held ready. Standing amidst a landscape of cosmic debris, Agnes encourages Cadet Eilette to use this cleared dungeon for training.
A system window identifies the area as the C-class dungeon known as the Black Salt Desert.
The pink-haired girl shields her eyes from the dust as she looks up at a massive silhouette. Allie stands in awe before the gargantuan skeletal remains of a long-dead creature. Agnes identifies the massive fossil as the century-old ribcage of a demonic dragon that once served as a mid-boss.
The pink-haired girl glances at a floating system window as she processes this new information.
The golden-haired woman explains that time within this dungeon moves significantly faster than in the outside world. They decide to continue their search, noting that the remains they seek are likely as ancient as the dragon bones.
Accompanied by a sudden light whoosh and whish sounding, a heavy sandstorm begins to swirl around the pair.
A system notification announces that Allie has reached the barrier of the Black Temple.
While Agnes worries about getting lost in the storm, Allie confidently mentions her use of a cheat code to navigate.
A digital map appears, showing a clear path and footprints leading toward a distant structure.
Staring at the glowing interface, Allie explains that she can follow the map even if her vision is obscured.
Accompanied by a sudden sharp trip and crash sounding, Allie falls flat on her face after catching her foot on a mound.
The pink-haired girl lies motionless in the sand as her companion calls out her name in concern.
Accompanied by a sudden light twitch sounding, Agnes realizes the mound Allie tripped over is actually alive and making noises.
Allie looks back in shock as she hears a pained groan coming from the ground behind her.
Accompanied by a sudden soft rustle sounding, Allie screams in terror upon seeing a dirt-covered face staring up at her.
Agnes confirms the man is still alive as the buried figure weakly mumbles about being hungry.
Accompanied by a sudden loud wail sounding, the man screams about his fear of losing muscle mass due to starvation. Both companions stare blankly, stunned by the man's bizarre preoccupation with his physique while near death. Accompanied by a sudden light rummage and rustle sounding, Agnes comments on the man's intense dedication to fitness even in his current state. Accompanied by a sudden light reach sounding, Allie offers a small piece of food to the starving man. Accompanied by a sudden light peak sounding, Agnes doubts the man has the strength left to chew. Accompanied by a sudden loud chomp, munch, and gulp sounding, the man instantly devours the food with surprising ferocity. Accompanied by a sudden heavy dun sounding, the man requests a sugar-free drink to accompany his snack.
The scene shifts to reveal several empty glass bottles scattered across the dark sand.
Emerging from the sand, the blonde-haired, muscular man thanks his rescuers before pausing in shock. Tears stream down the man's face as he mistakenly identifies the confused girl as his daughter, Althea. Accompanied by a sudden, heavy hug sounding and a quick oof sounding, the blonde-haired man scoops the small girl into a crushing embrace, exclaiming that he knew he would find her after searching the dungeon for 2 long months. Accompanied by a sudden light squeeze sounding, the pink-haired girl shouts for the man to wait, clarifying that her name is Ailette and he has mistaken her for someone named Althea, while the golden-haired woman angrily demands that he release her cadet immediately.
The muscular man looks down in confusion, beginning to realize his mistake as he asks if she really isn't Althea. As he holds the pink-haired girl at arm's length, the man reflects that his daughter would have grown into an adult by now, noting that while this child looks exactly like Althea, she is far too young.
Looking dejected, the man laments that his daughter is still missing, prompting Eilette to ask if he has truly been wandering this place for 2 months without any food.
The man explains that he entered the dungeon because the person he seeks might be inside, but he became trapped in the relentless sandstorm and lost his way.
Allie gazes up at the weary, aging face of the man and tells him not to worry. Accompanied by a sudden light grin sounding, Eilette stands confidently and promises to lead him somewhere safe, telling him he can count on her. The man stares at her in silence, deeply moved by her bold offer of help. Accompanied by a sudden soft rustle sounding, the man smiles to himself as he thinks about how much the child reminds him of Althea. Accompanied by a sudden loud whoosh and wobble sounding, Allie lets out a small cry of surprise as the wind nearly knocks her off her feet.
Accompanied by a sudden, quick grab sounding, Ali looks up in shock as the man reaches for her. Accompanied by a sudden, light lift sounding, the man places Eilette on his broad shoulders, telling her that her tiny body can't handle the storm and asking her to simply point the way. Accompanied by a sudden, heavy flex and loud zoom sounding, the man launches himself forward with a thunderous shout of joy.
The pair becomes a tiny silhouette against a backdrop of explosive energy as they soar through the air. Thrilled by the speed, Eilette cheers and comments on how strong the man must have been in his prime, though he laughingly insists that he is far from retired.
Accompanied by a sudden, sharp yank sounding, Eilette pulls on the man's hair to steer him left, causing him to cry out in pain and beg her to stop before she makes him go bald.
Accompanied by a sudden, fast dash sounding, the girl jokingly apologizes but notes he has plenty of hair to spare, prompting the man to laugh and tell her to yank as much as she needs if she truly thinks he won't go bald. Accompanied by a sudden, repeated yank, tug, and pull sounding, Eilette shouts out a series of rapid-fire directions while the man yelps in pain from the constant hair pulling.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy trudge sounding, the pair makes their way through the shifting, dark sands of the desert.
Accompanied by a sudden, rhythmic trudge sounding, heavy footsteps leave deep imprints in the vast, empty dunes. Accompanied by a sudden, light dah sounding, a massive, crumbling stone temple looms out of the darkness. Accompanied by a sudden, heavy dun sounding, the man stands before the grand ruins with the small girl still perched on his shoulders. Accompanied by a sudden, light step sounding, they cross the threshold and begin walking across the stone floor of the structure.
The man thanks the child for leading him there, but asks if she is certain she wants to enter, warning her that even with the boss dead, the area remains dangerous.
Ali looks determined as she explains she has her own business to attend to, specifically collecting loot from the S-Class boss and completing her quest.
The blonde-haired man looks at her with an expression of quiet respect and curiosity.
Accompanied by a sudden, steady step sounding, the man agrees and suggests they enter the dark, smoking interior together. Accompanied by a sudden light ding sounding, a pink system window confirms that they have entered the boss area known as the Temple of the Black Desert. Accompanied by a sudden echoing step sounding, the two tiny figures walk between massive, ornate pillars inside the silent hall.
As they walk, the man asks Eilette what brought a child like her to such a place, noting that her mother must be very worried about her.
Ali nonchalantly replies that she doubts her mother is worried since she ran away from home 6 years ago, leaving the man completely stunned.
Eilette explains that while her brother thinks their mother went missing while farming, she believes she simply abandoned them, telling the man not to look so apologetic because she doesn't even remember her.
Turning the question around, Ali asks how the man lost his own daughter, causing him to clear his throat nervously as he prepares to answer.
Eilette shouts in disbelief, wondering why everyone in this universe seems to be running away from home.
The man begins to sob comically, wailing that his daughter ran away because of him, which prompts Ali to ask what exactly happened. The man's face turns solemn as he gazes into the distance, lost in a painful memory.
Narration describes a man from long ago who fell deeply in love with a woman of humble origins.
Text explains that his family's opposition led to a painful breakup, and that years later he learned of the lady's death and the existence of a child she had been carrying when they parted.
Determined to fix his past, the man rode across the continent and contacted every orphanage in search of his child.
A portrait shows the young, pink-haired girl he eventually found and named Althea.
Looking at his new daughter, the man in his decorated military uniform vowed to change his ways.
He decided to give his beloved daughter everything he had, including his most valuable possession. An ornate, glowing crest appears as the narration reveals that he intended to give her his noble lineage.
The scene returns to the present as the crest fades and Eilette suddenly stops the man.
Ali shouts in total shock, asking the man if he is actually a member of the nobility.
As they continue walking, Eilette frantically asks if he is a baron or a count and apologizes for pulling his hair, but he tells her it's fine and to just treat him like a normal grandpa.
A flashback shows the pink-haired Althea buried under a mountain of paperwork as her father began educating her to be his heiress. Accompanied by a sudden light drop and drip sounding, a hand shakes while writing as the narration notes the family's teaching methods were incredibly strict.
Althea is shown with a nosebleed from the intense pressure, struggling with the sudden transition from being a commoner to a noble heiress.
Narration describes the cold and harsh man who was meant to be her father.
Accompanied by a sudden rhythmic step sounding, the blonde man struggles to show affection while young Althea calls out to him. The pink-haired girl vows to become a dependable heiress to keep him safe.
His face twists in silent anguish.
Accompanied by a sudden rhythmic step sounding, the father coldly demands she maintain formalities and stop calling him father. Ali is shocked by the revelation of how her mother was treated. Accompanied by a sudden soft weep sounding, the grandfather tries to justify his actions while Ali boos his excuses. The man looks back in regret as things only grew worse.
A girl named Elisa suddenly appears.
Elisa claims to be the real daughter, while Ali recognizes the common fantasy trope. The newcomer bears a striking resemblance to his late lover.
Memories of his late lover's illness fill him with pain. He showered the stranger with affection right in front of a devastated Althea.
A sudden, loud shudder sounding.
Elisa mockingly tells Althea she will be replaced and abandoned once the family register is updated.
A sudden, heavy slam sounding, accompanied by a sudden quick click and clack sounding. Althea questions her father's decision to list Elisa as family. Accompanied by a sudden, heavy slam sounding and a light drip and drop sounding, he berates his crying daughter for being narrow-minded and immature. Accompanied by a sudden, soft falter sounding, she is left completely speechless by his cruelty. Accompanied by a sudden firm clench sounding, she realizes he has already made his final decision.
Althea declares she has become useless to him and mocks his concern for the family reputation.
Accompanied by a sudden, joyous spring sounding, the man stands up in anger while Althea suggests he wants her dead. She decides to vanish of her own accord to spare the family from any further dishonor.
Althea walks away into the distance.
The man admits he was only harsh because he wanted her to be his heir.
He reveals Elisa was eventually exposed as a fraudster looking for his wealth.
Ali is in total disbelief over her grandfather's poor judgment.
Accompanied by a sudden, soft hick sounding, the man weeps while Ali scolds him for being an untrustworthy parent.
Ali notes the absurdity of the situation as the old man feels completely drained. The little girl suddenly freezes.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy dud-dun sounding, they find a field of petrified monsters. Accompanied by a sudden, heavy crumble and thud sounding, the massive stone beasts lie broken on the ground. Accompanied by a sudden, heavy stagger sounding, Ali asks about the stone statues. Accompanied by a sudden, heavy dun sounding, the man screams Althea's name as they find a petrified woman. Accompanied by a sudden, clumsy fumble and stumble sounding, the man rushes toward the stone figure. Accompanied by a sudden, warm hug sounding, he tearfully embraces the statue and refuses to say goodbye. Accompanied by a sudden, soft weep sounding, Ali watches her grandfather's despair. Accompanied by a sudden, soft sob sounding, Ali realizes this person stopped a dungeon burst alone.
She notices the peculiar farm tools held by the statue. Memories of a pink-haired woman holding farm tools resurface. Ali realizes the truth of the start.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy dun sounding, Ali shouts in realization that the statue is her mother.
The blonde man is completely bewildered by her claim. Ali recalls how her mother supposedly fled with farming equipment. The statue holds a plow in one hand and a hoe in the other.
Accompanied by a sudden, rhythmic step sounding, Ali notes she left in a nightgown.
The girl confirms the stone lady is indeed her mother.
A sudden, firm grab sounding.
Accompanied by a sudden, joyous raise sounding, the man lifts Ali into the air, ecstatic to have a granddaughter.
Ali tries to get his attention for a crucial update.
The petrified lady holding a pitchfork remains stone cold but lacks any visible life-threatening injuries.
Ali's gaze shifts upward in realization.
A sudden, heavy da-dun sounding.
Ali identifies the giant eye as the monster behind the petrification curse while a system window notes its sensitive reaction.
Overjoyed by the discovery, Ali's face lights up with a sudden, radiant beam sounding.
Ali confidently declares that her mother can be saved if the curse is undone, leaving the muscular man shocked.
The girl makes the blonde man promise to keep a secret regarding the power she is about to unveil.
The pair ascends the stone stairs as the man solemnly swears to keep her secret.
Standing before her stone-encased mother, Ali prepares herself to confront the nature of the demonic curse. She focuses her inner strength, certain that her divine power is the key to breaking the spell.
A sudden, brilliant shimmer sounding.
Ali's pink hair turns pure white.
The blonde man watches in awe, wondering how a child can wield such massive divine power. Ali attributes her incredible strength to her status as a pious believer.
The girl pauses her efforts to ask if the man would like to join her faith.
Accompanied by a sudden, cheerful thumbs-up sounding, Ali promises to save her mother while the man begs to skip the sermon. Her hands glow with golden light. A magical circle surrounds her mother. A sudden, explosive foosh sobbing. Accompanied by a sudden, light ding sounding, the blonde man is left completely speechless by the miracle.
Ali celebrates the success of her prayer while the system confirms the spread of her faith.
A sudden, soft sounding. Accompanied by a sudden, sharp cringe sounding, Ali gaggingly complains about the salty taste of the petrified remains. The pink-haired woman awakens and stands up, worrying about how much time has passed since she was cursed. The mother freezes in place as she recognizes the girl standing before her. Accompanied by a sudden, firm grab sounding, the mother pulls Ali close, shocked by her growth and white hair. Accompanied by a sudden, pained ugh sounding, the woman laments missing her daughter's childhood and asks for her current age.
Ali nervously reveals she is 10 years old, admitting how strange the revelation feels now. Accompanied by a sudden, loud new sounding, the mother screams in despair over the lost 6 years and apologizes for swearing.
Accompanied by a sudden, light yank sounding, Allie tells her mother there is no need to censor her words.
Mother and daughter share an embrace.
Tears fall as the mother heartfully apologizes for leaving Allie behind. The woman asks Allie if she was lonely or had a hard time while she was a lead.
A lonely child sits in darkness. The mother holds Allie very tightly.
A sudden, light squeeze sounder.
Allie explains she looks sad because she has no memories of her mother at all.
The pink-haired woman tearfully promises that she will never leave Allie's side again.
Her mother gently cups Allie's face. A sudden, warm hug.
Narration describes how Allie has grown up and experienced death, yet still feels the weight of her past.
The man watches with quiet sorrow.
The mother notices the man nearby.
Accompanied by a sudden, soft glisten sounding, the man tearfully identifies himself as her father.
The woman stares in total disbelief.
The pink-haired woman coldly rejects the man, claiming that she does not have a father.
They stand within the raging storm.
A sudden, rhythmic speck sounding.
Accompanied by a sudden, quick whoosh and swoosh sounding, the man begs to be called daddy, while Allie finds the family argument incredibly uncomfortable.
The blonde man pleads for Althea to return home, offering to hand over his noble title to her immediately.
The pink-haired woman rejects the offer, suggesting he give the title to the actor hired to deceive him. The man admits the other girl was a swindler.
Accompanied by a sudden, firm grab sounding, the man catches Althea's hand and begs for a moment to explain.
A sudden, powerful whoosh sounding.
A sudden, thunderous crash sounding.
The white-haired girl expresses shock at the man's immense weight, while a system window encourages her to obey her mother.
Accompanied by a sudden, loud kirk sounding, a massive stone pillar cracks and crumbles above them.
A sudden, heavy crumble sounding. Althea and Allie look up in terror as a giant rock plunges toward them. A sudden, deafening crash sounding. A sudden, thick fsh sounding.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy da-dun sounding, the muscular man uses his own body as a shield to protect his family.
Althea scolds her father for his recklessness, but he insists his injuries are nothing compared to the pain he caused her.
The woman stares in stunned silence.
Accompanied by a sudden, heavy kneel sounding, the man drops to his knees to offer a humble apology.
He explains that his past cruelty was a misguided attempt to prepare her for her future as his heiress.
The blonde man tearfully admits he was a failure of a father who never learned how to properly love his child. Conflicted emotions play across her face. Accompanied by a sudden, soft turn sounding, the woman looks away as the man begs for a chance to make amends. Allie notes her mother is soft-hearted.
Althea remains silent and deeply troubled. The little girl asks if she can see her grandfather more often to help bridge the family gap.
Excited by the possibility, the man suggests they all move into his home together as a family.
Althea immediately rejects the living arrangement.
She explains that she has no interest in nobility and is perfectly content with her current life. She eventually relents, agreeing to consider occasional visits for Allie's sake and asking him to stand up. Accompanied by a sudden, joyous spring sounding, the man leaps into the air and suggests a busy holiday schedule. Althea tells him to stop making a scene, but he remains overjoyed and offers her anything she desires.
She suddenly remembers an important favor.
She asks him to punish a man named Hakim Sarmatan on her behalf.
Allie recognizes her father's enemy.
Accompanied by a sudden, hot blaze sounding, Althea describes how Hakim bullied and extorted her husband.
The girl adds that the man also stole her father's research and got him expelled from his post.
Accompanied by a sudden, loud crack sounding, Althea seethes with rage while the man promises to eliminate the threat. She questions his reliability, and he vows in the name of justice to punish Hakim Satan.
Althea deadpans as she corrects his mistake regarding the name of the man who wronged her family.
Accompanied by a sudden, soft puffed sounding, the woman breaks into a smile at his foolish mistake.
The child sees hope for them. Father and daughter stand together peacefully. Allie suddenly remembers another crucial question.
She asks for the family name, and the man claims it is a small but impressive title.
He introduces himself with great pride as Aaron J. Keith Fenra.
The little girl is completely stunned.
The grand family name is revealed.
Allie realizes he is a legendary Grand Duke and the continent's strongest man from her memories.
A system window mocks her treps.
Allie is ecstatic about her mobility.
The man uses Allie's reaction to try and convince Althea to reconsider inheriting the family line.
Allie clarifies that while the title is tempting, she will always stand by her mother's final decision.
Accompanied by a sudden low droop sounding, the grandfather's spirits sink at the continued rejection. Accompanied by a sudden warm hug sounding, Allie and her mother share a tender embrace as the woman expresses how proud she is of her daughter before suddenly noticing something wrong. Accompanied by a sudden sharp jolt and wheeze sounding, the mother panics as she realizes Allie is burning up with a dangerous fever and asks why she kept her illness a secret.
Accompanied by a sudden quick whip sounding, the girl stops her mother from rushing to close the dungeon and find a doctor.
Ali explains that she is only suffering from a holy fever and begs her mother not to leave the dungeon before she recovers. Ali explains that she doesn't want her father or prince to worry and that time passes faster in the dungeon, while her mother panics over her high temperature and the grandfather begs her to stay awake as he suspects the fever is a penalty for her massive divine power.
Ali struggles to keep her eyes open as she asks for a promise, wondering why she is sick after only using her divine power for a short time.
Ali begs them to keep her secret. Her family's voices become a muffled blur.
Ali decides to take a short nap.
A system notification confirms that Ali is suffering from holy fever as a penalty for overextending her divine skills.
The recovery process recommends sleep and sets a countdown of nearly 2 full days for the fever to break.
The pink-haired girl finally wakes up.